I should probably start by saying that I didn't end up in this freezing bedsit by accident. I've been wearing 2 jumpers most evenings just to take the edge off the cold, sitting here in this cramped little room, while I tried to make sense of how things went the way they did. I had a proper flat in Norwich not long ago, decent heating, a bit of space, a view over the park. But I walked away from all of that once I realized what I'd actually been part of these past 8 months. Most nights now, I sit with my laptop balanced on my knees, not typing, just staring at the screen, as I think back over the messages I read and the content I reviewed, all the tiny decisions I made without really understanding who was watching. I used to tell people I worked in content moderation, the harmless kind that keeps things neat and polite. Then I lost that job when the company replaced half of us with automation, and I took on something else that paid far better for what sounded like the same sort of work. It wasn't. And that's the story I'm trying to tell here. How a job I thought I understood ended with me hiding out in a cold room, wondering if the people behind it are going to come looking. I'd been moderating content for a social media platform for about 4 years, before the company decided artificial intelligence could do most of what I did for a fraction of the cost. One day I was reviewing flagged posts and comments. The next I was being told my position was being eliminated, along with 60% of the moderation team. I was 39 years old with a very specific skill set that turned out to be increasingly obsolete. The redundancy package was adequate but not generous, and I spent the better part of 2 months applying for similar roles. Most companies were moving toward automation or outsourcing to countries where labor was cheaper. The few positions I found wanted people with technical qualifications I didn't possess. That's when I saw the job posting on a remote work website. Someone was looking for experienced content moderators to help manage discussion spaces on privacy-focused platforms. The pay was exceptional, nearly £3,000 per month for what they estimated would be about 30 hours of work per week. They emphasized that they needed people who could work independently, make consistent judgment calls, and maintain strict confidentiality about the platforms they'd be moderating. I should have questioned why anyone would pay such generous rates for content moderation work when most companies were desperately trying to reduce those costs. Should have wondered what kind of privacy-focused platforms needed human moderators rather than automated systems. But I was getting desperate, watching my savings diminish while I sent out application after application with no responses. The application process was straightforward. I submitted my CV along with examples of moderation decisions I'd made in my previous role, explaining my reasoning and approach to balancing free expression with community safety. Within 2 days, I had a response requesting a video interview. The interviewer called himself David, though I suspected that wasn't his real name. He explained that their platforms operated in spaces where mainstream social media companies had limited reach, serving communities that valued privacy and unrestricted discussion. They needed moderators who could maintain order without being overly restrictive. People who understood the difference between genuine safety concerns and content that was simply controversial or unpopular. He was careful to emphasize that the work would involve reviewing material that might be disturbing or offensive. The platforms attracted people with unconventional views, and moderators needed to have thick skin and good judgment about what actually constituted a rule violation versus what was just unpleasant but legal expression. That all sounded reasonable to me. I'd spent years reviewing flagged content on mainstream platforms and was accustomed to seeing unpleasant material. I understood that content moderation required balancing competing values, and I was confident in my ability to make consistent judgments based on clear guidelines. David offered me the position at the end of the interview, pending completion of a brief training period where I'd shadow experienced moderators and learn the specific rules and expectations for their platforms. The pay would start immediately, and I'd be working entirely remotely using secure communication systems they'd provide. The training materials arrived via encrypted file transfer, along with login credentials for the platforms I'd be moderating. David explained that the platforms use special browser technology to protect user privacy, which was why they couldn't be accessed through normal internet connections. He provided step-by-step instructions for setting up the necessary software. When I finally accessed the platforms, my first impression was how basic they looked compared to mainstream social media. Simple layouts, minimal graphics, text-based discussions organized into topic categories. The interface reminded me of internet communities from the late 90s, before companies had invested millions in sophisticated user experiences. The content itself was immediately concerning. I'd been expecting controversial political discussions or conspiracy theories, the sort of material that mainstream platforms restricted, but that wasn't necessarily illegal. Instead, I found discussions about topics that were clearly criminal in nature. Detailed guides for exploiting various systems, conversations about targeting specific individuals, even exchanges about coordinating illegal activities. When I raised concerns during my training, the senior moderator explained that their role wasn't to judge the legality or morality of what users discussed. The platforms existed to facilitate free expression in spaces where government surveillance and corporate censorship couldn't reach. Our job was simply to enforce the specific rules the platforms had established, not to act as moral arbiters or law enforcement. The rules themselves were surprisingly specific. No spam or commercial advertising, no revealing personal information about other users without permission, no coordinating attacks against the platforms themselves or their administrators. But almost everything else was permitted, including discussions of criminal activity, as long as they remained theoretical rather than active coordination. I was deeply uncomfortable with the distinction they were drawing, but the senior moderator emphasized that moderators who couldn't maintain professional distance from disturbing content wouldn't last long in the role. This work required accepting that facilitating free expression sometimes meant allowing discussions we personally found abhorrent. I convinced myself this was no different from the principle that defending free speech sometimes means protecting speech we disagree with. I wasn't endorsing what users discussed, just maintaining spaces where they could express themselves without censorship. My role was technical and professional, not moral or legal. The first few weeks of actual moderation work tested that rationalization severely. I reviewed hundreds of flagged posts and comments every day, making decisions about whether they violated the platform's specific rules. Most of the time, the violations were clear: spam, personal information being shared, direct threats against platform administrators. But I was also seeing content that was deeply disturbing. Detailed discussions about exploiting vulnerable people, guides for circumventing security measures and accessing systems without authorization, conversations about targeting specific individuals for harassment or worse, all technically within the platform's rules because they remain theoretical discussions rather than active coordination. I found myself removing spam and commercial advertising while allowing posts that discuss criminal activity in disturbingly specific detail. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, but I kept telling myself I was just following the rules I'd been hired to enforce. I wasn't responsible for what users chose to discuss within those parameters. The breakthrough came about 3 months into the work when I recognized specific details in a discussion thread. Users were discussing a harassment campaign against a teacher in Norfolk, sharing her work address, her daily routine, even photographs of her home and car. The posts technically didn't violate platform rules because they weren't coordinating attacks, just sharing information and discussing theoretical approaches. But I recognized the school mentioned in the discussion. It was where my sister's children attended, in a small town outside King's Lynn. The teacher being discussed was someone I'd met at school events, a kind woman who taught primary school children and had never done anything to warrant the obsessive documentation these users were compiling. I realized I was moderating platforms that facilitated systematic harassment and stalking of real people, including people I knew personally. The theoretical discussions I was allowing weren't abstract debates about controversial topics. They were planning and intelligence gathering for criminal activity against identifiable individuals. I tried reporting the harassment campaign to David, explaining that users were clearly coordinating activity that would result in real harm to a specific person. He thanked me for the report, but explained that unless users explicitly coordinated illegal actions in their posts, the discussions fell within allowed parameters. The platforms existed to facilitate free expression, even when that expression involved sharing information about people who hadn't consented to being discussed. That response made me understand I wasn't moderating online communities to protect users from harm. I was maintaining spaces where people planned and coordinated criminal activity against vulnerable targets. The free expression we were facilitating was actually systematic intelligence gathering and harassment that destroyed real people's lives. I started paying closer attention to the platforms I was moderating, looking beyond individual rule violations to understand the broader context of what users were discussing. What I found was horrifying in its scope and organization. The platforms hosted extensive discussions about identifying vulnerable targets for various types of exploitation. Users shared techniques for surveillance, advice on circumventing security measures, even guides for psychologically manipulating specific types of victims. They coordinated activities without explicitly stating their criminal nature, using coded language and theoretical framing that technically didn't violate platform rules. One category of discussions focused on identifying and exploiting elderly people living alone. Users shared information about specific individuals, photographs of their homes, details about their daily routines. They discussed theoretical approaches for gaining access to properties, theoretical techniques for convincing people to provide financial information or access to their accounts. Another section dealt with targeting children through online spaces. Users shared information about children's social media accounts, their schools, their after-school activities. They discussed theoretical approaches for establishing contact, theoretical techniques for building trust with young people who might be isolated or vulnerable. I was looking at what amounted to criminal planning being conducted in plain sight, shielded by the pretense that these were merely theoretical discussions protected by principles of free expression. And I was the one ensuring these discussions could continue by removing spam and obvious rule violations, while allowing the substantive criminal content to remain. The teacher my sister knew was just one of hundreds of people being systematically targeted through discussions on the platforms I moderated. Each day, I reviewed posts documenting surveillance of specific individuals, sharing their personal information, discussing approaches for exploiting their vulnerabilities. But what made it unbearable was understanding that my moderation work was essential to the platform's operation. The constant spam, scams, and obvious rule violations would have made the platforms unusable if moderators like me weren't filtering them out. By removing the noise, I was making it easier for users to conduct their targeted harassment and criminal planning without distraction. I tried to refuse further work, but David made it clear that wasn't an option I could simply choose. I'd been working for the platforms for months, seeing everything users discussed, making decisions about what content should remain visible. I knew too much about how they operated and what they facilitated. Walking away would mean explaining to potential future employers why I'd left such well-paid work, and it would mean losing the substantial income I'd become dependent on. I was trapped by my own complicity. I couldn't report the platforms to authorities without admitting I'd been enabling criminal activity for months. I couldn't continue moderating without accepting that I was facilitating serious harm to real people. And I couldn't simply walk away without consequences from people who had extensive documentation of my involvement in maintaining these spaces. That's when I started documenting everything I saw on the platforms, taking screenshots and keeping detailed records of the criminal discussions I was being required to allow. I told myself I was preserving evidence for eventual reporting to authorities, but really I was just trying to feel less guilty about the harm I was enabling every day. The teacher in Norfolk ended up leaving her job after the harassment became unbearable. Users on the platform celebrated their successful campaign, discussing techniques they'd used and sharing lessons learned for future targeting. I read those celebration posts and knew I'd played a role in destroying a good person's career and sense of safety. I found other cases where people I'd allowed to be discussed on the platforms had subsequently been victimized. An elderly man in Somerset, whose information had been shared in those targeting discussions, was burgled shortly afterwards. A young mother in Wales, who'd been identified as vulnerable on the platforms, experienced systematic harassment that drove her from her home. Each case made it clearer that my moderation work wasn't just facilitating abstract discussions. It was enabling real criminal activity that destroyed real lives. The theoretical framing users employed to avoid explicit rule violations was just a linguistic shield that let them coordinate actual crimes, while I helpfully removed the spam and obvious violations that might have interfered with their planning. I tried contacting the police about what I'd discovered, but explaining my role proved impossible without admitting extensive complicity. I'd been moderating platforms for months, carefully removing content that violated specific rules while allowing criminal planning to continue unimpeded. My screenshots and documentation showed my intimate involvement in maintaining spaces where serious crimes were coordinated. The officer I spoke to was professional but frank about my position. I'd knowingly worked for platforms facilitating criminal activity. Accepting substantial payment for work I must have understood was enabling harm. Cooperation might be valuable for their investigation, but I shouldn't expect immunity from prosecution for my role in the operation. I was advised to stop moderating immediately and refuse further contact with the platform administrators. But David had already anticipated that possibility. I received messages explaining that moderators who caused problems for the platforms faced serious consequences. They had extensive records of my moderation decisions, including content I'd allowed to remain that had subsequently enabled criminal activity. If I tried to report them, they'd ensure authorities understood my active role in facilitating that activity. I realized I was being blackmailed with documentation of my own moderation work. Even though I'd been following the rules I'd been hired to enforce, the records showed me making decisions that allowed criminal planning to continue. They could present me as an active facilitator of the harm these platforms enabled. That's when the harassment started in earnest. I began finding my own personal information appearing on the platforms I'd been moderating. Users discussed my work history, my address, my daily routines. They shared photographs of my flat taken from outside, discussed theoretical approaches for accessing my home, even speculated about vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I was now being subjected to the same treatment I'd been enabling for months through my moderation work. Users were documenting my life with the same methodical precision they'd applied to all their previous targets, discussing approaches for ensuring my silence about what I'd seen on their platforms. The cognitive dissonance of seeing my own information being shared in spaces I was supposed to be moderating was overwhelming. I was expected to continue removing spam and obvious rule violations from discussions about targeting me, maintaining the platform's functionality, even as it facilitated my own harassment. I stopped logging into the moderation systems entirely, knowing that refusing to work would trigger the consequences David had warned about, but unable to continue enabling discussions that now directly threaten my own safety. Within days, I started receiving packages containing printed screenshots of moderation decisions I'd made, with annotations showing how those decisions had enabled specific criminal activities. The message was clear. They had comprehensive documentation of my complicity, and they'd use it to destroy my life if I caused them problems by reporting to authorities or refusing to remain silent about what I'd seen. That's when I left Norwich entirely, packing essential belongings and driving to Stoke-on-Trent, where I had no previous connections. I've been staying in this inadequate bedsit, avoiding digital traces and hoping I can disappear long enough to work out what to do next. But I know the platforms are still operating, still facilitating criminal planning and coordination, still enabling systematic targeting of vulnerable people. Other moderators have probably been recruited to replace me. People who make the same rationalizations I did about just enforcing rules and maintaining free expression. I think about that teacher in Norfolk, about the elderly man who was burgled, about all the other people whose lives were destroyed through discussions I allowed to remain visible. They trusted that online platforms had some responsibility to prevent coordination of criminal activity, that moderators would remove content that enabled serious harm. But I proved them wrong by carefully maintaining the platform's functionality, while allowing criminal planning to continue unimpeded. Every spam post I removed, every obvious violation I caught, it all made the platforms more effective at facilitating the criminal discussions I was required to ignore. The platforms taught me that moderation itself can be weaponized, that enforcing narrow technical rules while ignoring broader criminal context makes you complicit in whatever harm those platforms enable, that free expression principles can be exploited to shield criminal activity behind theoretical framing and coded language, and that once you've spent months moderating platforms you know are facilitating criminal activity, you become complicit enough that reporting them means destroying your own life along with exposing their operations. I suppose that's why I'm still sitting here in this freezing bedsit, rather than going back to police with all the evidence I preserved. Because I know that documentation implicates me as much as it exposes the platforms, and I'm not brave enough to face consequences for choices I made when I convinced myself I was just following the rules I'd been hired to enforce. All I can do is hope that someone else will eventually expose these platforms, that other moderators will find the courage I lack to report what they're enabling, despite the personal consequences, and hope that the people being targeted through discussions on those platforms find some way to protect themselves from criminal activity being coordinated in spaces that present themselves as merely facilitating controversial free expression. Because the platforms are still operating, still recruiting moderators, still facilitating systematic targeting of vulnerable people. And I helped maintain them for months, carefully removing spam and obvious violations, while allowing criminal planning to flourish unchecked. The damp chill of the Manchester evening always found its way inside, even with the windows sealed tight. It clung to the threadbare carpet, seeped into the plaster, and settled deep in my bones. Another Tuesday bled into another Wednesday, marked only by the shifting glow of the monitor. My flat, a rented box of beige and off-white, offered little resistance to the creeping greyness of my existence. The low hum of the fridge, the distant wail of a siren, the rhythmic tap of rain against the glass. These were the symphonies of my solitude. Tonight, the internet offered its usual shallow distractions. My fingers, accustomed to the familiar dance across the keyboard, navigated the labyrinthine corridors of obscure forums. I sought something, anything, to puncture the dull throb of predictability that defined my days. It wasn't a search for connection, not really. More a morbid curiosity, a desire to peer into the cracks of the world, to feel the brief tremor of something real. That's how I found it, a whispered link on a thread dedicated to forgotten corners of the darknet. The Eye of Kronos, it claimed, a private auction site, a marketplace for experiences. The description was deliberately vague, tantalizing in its ambiguity, unfiltered, live, beyond the veil. My initial reaction was a scoff, a dismissive flick of the wrist, another scam, another digital ghost story. But the seed was planted. I bookmarked the link. It sat there, a tiny, innocuous icon amidst a sea of banality, yet it hummed with an unseen energy. The next day, the bookmark beckoned. My lunch break dissolved into a hypnotic scroll through the site's landing page. The interface was stark, almost brutally minimalist. Black text on a charcoal background. No flashy graphics, no pop-ups. Just a single rotating banner. The unseen, the unheard, the unlived. A login portal shimmered beneath. My curiosity, a passive beast until now, stirred. I created an account, a throwaway email and a password plucked from the ether. The confirmation email arrived instantly, a clinical, unadorned message. No welcoming prose, no marketing spiel. Just a link to the main auction page. The page itself was a grid of thumbnails, each a static image. They were unsettling, not overtly graphic, but imbued with a disquieting stillness. A cracked porcelain doll's face, a single bloodied feather on a pristine white sheet, a blurred image of what might have been a hand reaching from shadow. Beneath each thumbnail, a countdown timer ticked relentlessly, alongside a cryptic title and a current bid in an unknown cryptocurrency. My routine began to warp. The moment I returned from the office, the site became my first port of call. My evenings, once a blur of mindless television and reheated meals, now revolved around these digital auctions. I didn't bid, not at first. I simply watched. The bids climbed, sometimes slowly, sometimes in sudden, frantic surges. The timers expired, and the thumbnails vanished, replaced by an experience completed tag. What happened after that, I couldn't fathom. The mystery only deepened my fixation. The descriptions grew darker, more explicit in their implications, though still cloaked in a chilling poetry. The last breath of a failing star, a symphony of silent screams, the unraveling of the thread. My stomach churned, a mixture of revulsion and an undeniable, sickening fascination. I felt a voyeuristic thrill, a sense of being privy to something forbidden, something the ordinary world kept hidden. One evening, a new listing appeared. Its thumbnail was a close-up of a tarnished brass key, resting on a dark, polished surface. The title, The Door to the Self. The description, brief and stark, read, "Witness the unmaking, the ultimate reflection." The countdown began. Something about it, perhaps its deceptive simplicity, lodged itself in my mind. The bid started low, then escalated with unnerving speed. I found myself holding my breath, my gaze glued to the screen. My fingers twitched, hovering over the bid button. A cold sweat slicked my palms. This was different. This felt personal. The sense of dread was palpable, a physical weight in my chest. Yet I couldn't look away. The timer hit 0. Experience completed. The thumbnail vanished. I felt a surge of disappointment, a strange emptiness. A few days later, a new listing appeared. This time marked Preview Available. It was a grainy, slightly distorted image of a room. My breath hitched. The wallpaper, the faded floral pattern, peeling at the seams near the ceiling, was unmistakably familiar. It was the wallpaper in my own living room. A cold, sharp shock traveled through me. My flat. It couldn't be. My eyes darted around the room, confirming the impossible. The slight scuff mark near the skirting board, the way the light caught the dust motes dancing above the old armchair. It was all there. A tremor ran through me, a primal fear seizing my gut. I clicked the preview button. The image expanded, still grainy, but undeniably my flat. A low, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the speakers. It was the hum of my fridge, the soft, rhythmic click of the old wall clock in the hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. A prank? A sophisticated hack? But how? There were no cameras, no hidden devices I knew of. I lived alone. My landlord, a stoic man who communicated solely through terse emails, rarely visited. No one had keys but me. The thought of an intruder, a hidden presence, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp. I stared at the screen, a bizarre mirror reflecting my own reality, twisted and distorted. I searched the image, desperate for a clue, a sign of artifice. Nothing. It was simply my living room, empty, waiting. The anonymity of the internet, once a comforting cloak, now felt like a gaping maw. The listing had a title, The Observer Observed, and a chilling description. A life unfolds, unseen, unjudged, until now. The countdown timer was already running. This wasn't an auction. This was a live stream. My fingers, numb with shock, navigated to the main page. All other listings had vanished. Only The Observer Observed remained, now prominently displayed, a single, horrifying invitation. The preview button had changed to View Stream. I hesitated, my cursor hovering. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to close the browser, to unplug the router, to smash the computer. But the morbid curiosity, the desperate need to understand, held me captive. This was it, the ultimate unfiltered experience, and it was mine. I clicked. The screen flickered, then resolved into a live feed. My living room, in real time. The same muted colors, the familiar clutter. The light from my monitor casting a faint glow on the opposite wall. I could see myself, a shadowy figure reflected in the glass of the screen within the screen. The perspective was static, as if from a fixed point in the corner of the room, high above the bookshelf. A low, guttural gasp escaped me. My own living room, my own life laid bare. I felt a profound violation, a stripping away of all privacy, yet no one was physically here. It was a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom. Then a sound, a faint, almost imperceptible creak from the hallway. My blood ran cold. The flat was silent, save for the hum of my electronics. But the stream, that accursed stream, picked up everything. The creak again, closer this time. My eyes darted to the screen. The door to my flat, usually locked with a deadbolt, was slowly, silently opening. A sliver of darkness appeared, then widened. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. My muscles had seized, locked in a tableau of terror. A figure emerged, tall, slender, cloaked in shadow. Its head was tilted, as if observing the room, assessing its emptiness. It moved with an unnerving grace, a predatory stillness. I couldn't make out any features, only the outline of a form, darker than the shadows it cast. It stepped fully into the living room, its presence a palpable weight that pressed down on me, even through the screen. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but I was paralyzed, a voyeur to my own nightmare. The figure paused, its gaze seemingly fixed on the spot where I sat, transfixed. A cold dread seeped into my bones. It knew I was watching. Then it moved, not towards me, but towards the bookshelf, my bookshelf. It ran a gloved hand along the spines of my books, a slow, deliberate caress. My collection of dog-eared paperbacks, the literary companions of my lonely evenings. A profound sense of intimacy, of my inner world being exposed, washed over me. It picked up a framed photograph from the shelf, a faded picture of my parents, taken years ago at the seaside. It held it for a moment, then slowly, deliberately, turned it face down. The small, almost insignificant action felt like a profound act of desecration. My mind screamed, this was real, this was happening. This was not a prank, not a hack. This was an invasion. The figure moved again, gliding across the room towards my armchair. The worn velvet, imprinted with the shape of my body after countless hours of sitting. It reached out, its fingers brushing the fabric, then settling on the remote control, exactly where I usually left it. A low, sibilant whisper emanated from the speakers. It was barely audible, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. You watch. We see. The voice was not human. It was a cacophony of whispers, a chorus of unseen entities, all speaking at once, yet forming a single, chilling utterance. It burrowed into my skull, vibrating through my very being. My eyes darted from the screen to the real-life armchair, then back again. My flat, my sanctuary, had become a stage, and I, the unwitting star. The figure turned its head, its shadowy form now facing the camera directly. I still couldn't discern any features, but I felt its gaze, a cold, unblinking stare that pierced through the screen, through the digital barrier, and into my very soul. It raised a hand, slowly, deliberately. Its fingers, long and skeletal, stretched towards the camera. The gesture was unmistakable, a beckoning, an invitation. My breath hitched. The screen flickered, then went black. The hum of the fridge, the click of the clock, the distant siren. They all returned, amplified in the sudden silence. The monitor, now a dark mirror, reflected my own terrified face. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. My body trembled uncontrollably. The cold sweat turned clammy. I was alone in the flat, yet I felt a presence, an unseen weight in the room. I stumbled backwards, knocking my chair over with a clatter. The sound echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of the room. My eyes darted to the hallway. The door was closed, locked, or was it? My memory, fractured by fear, couldn't confirm. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old building a harbinger of doom. My gaze fell on the bookshelf, the photograph of my parents. It was still face down. A whimpering sound escaped my throat. It was my own. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the door. My hand fumbled for my phone, a lifeline in the encroaching darkness. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to unlock it. What would I say? Someone is in my flat, but I only saw them on a live stream of my flat, which I found on a dark web auction site. They'd think I was mad. My gaze drifted back to the monitor. The screen remained black, but a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of light emanated from its depths. A single pixel, perhaps, or something else entirely. I felt it then, a cold breath on the back of my neck. My hair stood on end. My skin crawled. I wasn't alone. A low, guttural chuckle resonated through the room. It wasn't from the speakers. It was here, in the air, around me. My eyes widened in terror. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. Only the familiar, comforting clutter of my living room. But the feeling persisted, an undeniable, suffocating presence. The chuckle came again, closer this time. A dry, rasping sound. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the very air I breathed. Welcome, Andrew. The voice was singular now, no longer a chorus. It was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. It knew my name. My blood ran cold. My mind, already fractured, threatened to shatter completely. How did it know? A cold, spectral hand brushed my cheek. I gasped, stumbling backwards, my legs giving way. I fell to the floor, my eyes wide with terror, scanning the empty space. Nothing. No one. Yet the touch was undeniable, leaving a trail of icy dread in its wake. You sought the unfiltered. You found it. The voice was directly above me now, a whisper that vibrated through my bones. And now, you are the experience. Panic, raw and visceral, seized me. I scrambled backwards, crawling across the floor, desperate to escape. My fingers scrabbled at the carpet, seeking purchase, seeking an exit. A shadow detached itself from the wall, coalescing into the familiar, slender form. It stood before me, its head still tilted, observing. Its presence radiated an ancient, malevolent power. The ultimate reflection, it repeated, its voice a silken rasp. The unmaking. My vision blurred, tears of terror streaming down my face. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. My throat was constricted, my lungs starved of air. The figure extended its hand again, not towards me, but towards my head. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a blow, for an end. Instead, I felt a gentle pressure, a subtle shift in the air around me. A profound sense of clarity, cold and sharp, flooded my mind. The terror, the panic, the confusion, they receded, replaced by an unnerving calm. I opened my eyes. The figure was still there, but it seemed to shimmer, its edges indistinct. The room, too, had changed. The colors were more vivid, the shadows deeper. Every detail, every dust mote, every imperfection stood out with startling clarity. "You are free to observe," the voice murmured, now seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere, from within. I tried to move, to speak, but my body felt distant, unresponsive. It was as if I was watching myself, a silent spectator in my own skin. My arms, my legs, my hands, they were no longer mine to command. The figure receded, melting back into the shadows from which it came. The room returned to its mundane state, the familiar clutter, the muted colors, but I was no longer the same. I stood up, my movements slow, deliberate, as if I were a puppet on invisible strings. I walked to the monitor, my eyes fixed on the black screen. The single flickering pixel was still there, a tiny, defiant pinprick of light in the darkness. I raised my hand, my own hand, and touched the screen. The pixel pulsed, brighter now, then expanded. It bloomed into an image, a new live stream. It was a room, an unfamiliar room filled with strange, archaic objects. A flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls. A figure sat at a table, hunched over a glowing screen. I leaned closer. The screen within the screen showed a grid of thumbnails. One of them, prominently displayed, was a close-up of a tarnished brass key. The title, The Door to the Self. My mind, now unnervingly calm, understood. The cycle, the endless, horrifying loop. I felt a faint, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips. Not my smile, but a smile nonetheless. The cold, analytical observer within me approved. The man on the screen, hunched over his monitor, was unaware. He was about to click the preview button. It's strange how the most life-changing discoveries can come from the most mundane tasks. 5 months ago, while cleaning up my digital clutter, I found something that has completely destroyed my sense of security and trust. I've moved house twice since then, changed my phone number, and still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I'm writing this down partly as a warning, but mostly because keeping it to myself is driving me insane. I work in IT support for a university in Manchester. Nothing glamorous, just fixing printers, resetting passwords, and explaining to professors why they shouldn't click on suspicious email links. I've always been organized with my physical possessions, but absolutely terrible with digital housekeeping. My desktop was always a mess of random files. My download folder, a digital wasteland of forgotten PDFs and installation packages. My bad habits caught up with me when my laptop started running painfully slow. After putting it off for months, I finally set aside a Sunday afternoon to do a proper digital cleanup. I was living alone in a small flat near the university, having recently broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years. She'd moved to Edinburgh for work, and neither of us wanted the hassle of a long-distance relationship. So there I was, single again, at 32, spending my weekend deleting old files, while rain pelted against my windows. I started with the obvious stuff, emptying the recycle bin, clearing my downloads folder, uninstalling unused programs. Then I moved on to my email accounts, where years of newsletters, promotional offers, and spam had accumulated. I had 3 accounts that needed attention: my work email, my personal Gmail, and an old Hotmail account I'd had since university that I mainly kept for nostalgia and as a backup. The Hotmail account was the worst. Over 15,000 unread messages dating back to 2008. I was about to mass delete everything when I noticed the junk folder had a notification showing 246 items. Curious about what the spam filter had caught, I clicked on it. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: penis enlargement offers, fake lottery wins, phishing attempts. But as I scrolled down, I noticed something odd. There were several emails from the same address, just a string of numbers and letters at a domain I didn't recognize. Each had an attachment named with a date, going back about 2 years. The most recent one was from just a week earlier. Now, I know better than to open random attachments, especially from my junk folder. That's literally part of what I teach in the basic IT security workshops for new staff. But something about the systematic naming and regular frequency made me pause. These didn't look like typical spam. They looked almost like scheduled reports. Against my better judgment, I opened the most recent email. There was no message, just a text file attachment. I scanned it with my antivirus before opening it, and it came back clean. When I opened the file, I found what appeared to be login credentials and instructions. There was a long string of characters labeled Onion URL, followed by a username and password. Below that were brief instructions. Use Tor browser only. Log in within 24 hours of receipt or credentials will reset. Do not share access. Monthly payment confirmed. I recognized the reference to an Onion URL and Tor. This was clearly related to the dark web. But why was someone sending these details to my old email address? And what was this about a monthly payment? I checked the other emails and found they all contained similar text files, each with different credentials but the same instructions. The dates corresponded to the first day of each month, like clockwork. My first thought was that these were meant for someone else. Perhaps the previous owner of my email address, though I'd had this account since I was an undergraduate. My second thought was more unsettling. What if someone was using my forgotten email account for something illegal? I should have deleted everything right then, should have changed my password, set up two-factor authentication, and forgotten all about it. But curiosity is a powerful force, especially when you're bored and alone on a rainy Sunday. I told myself I was just being responsible. If someone was using my email for something illegal, I should know about it, right? So I downloaded the Tor browser, something I'd never used before despite working in IT. I told myself it was just research, that I would take a quick look and then report anything suspicious to the proper authorities. I copied the Onion URL from the text file and pasted it into the Tor browser. It directed me to what looked like a login page with a minimalist black background. No site name, no logo, no indication of what this was for. Just username and password fields. Heart racing. I entered the credentials from the text file. The site loaded to what appeared to be a video hosting platform, similar to YouTube but with a much simpler interface. There were about 24 thumbnails organized in a grid, each showing what looked like CCTV footage of different rooms in a house. Some showed living rooms, others bedrooms, kitchens, even bathrooms. Each thumbnail had a date and timestamp from the previous month. I clicked on one that showed a living room. The video played, showing a completely ordinary scene. A woman in her 30s sitting on a sofa watching television while scrolling on her phone. The footage lasted about 5 minutes, during which nothing remarkable happened. She got up at one point to leave the room, came back with a glass of water, and resumed watching TV. I tried another video, this one of a kitchen. A man was cooking dinner while listening to music. Again, completely mundane. I clicked through several more videos, all showing similar everyday moments in people's lives. It was like watching the most boring reality show ever made. Then it hit me. These weren't actors. These weren't people who knew they were being filmed. These were private moments in private homes, recorded without consent. I was looking at footage from hacked security cameras or compromised devices. My stomach churned as the implications sank in. Someone had been using my forgotten email account as a way to distribute access to what amounted to illegal surveillance. And according to the instructions, someone was paying monthly for this access. I immediately closed the browser, feeling sick with guilt and fear. I just watched people who had no idea they were being observed. I'd invaded their privacy, even if unintentionally. And now my IP address was connected to this site, even though I'd used Tor. I spent the next hour changing all my passwords, enabling two-factor authentication on every account I had, and scanning my computer for malware. I debated whether to report what I'd found to the police, but hesitated. How would I explain that I'd accessed the site? Would they believe I had stumbled upon it innocently? Instead, I decided to send an anonymous tip to the cybercrime unit, providing the email address and a general description of what I'd found, but not mentioning my connection to it. I hoped they would investigate and shut down whatever operation this was. For the next week, I jumped at every notification on my phone, half expecting police to show up at my door. Nothing happened. No response to my tip, no suspicious activity on any of my accounts. I started to relax a little, telling myself that I'd done the right thing and could now move on. Then, exactly 1 month after discovering the emails, I received a message on my personal Gmail account, the one I actually used regularly. The subject line was missed payment, and it was from the same string of numbers and letters as the Hotmail emails. The message was brief. Payment interrupted. Service will terminate unless restored within 48 hours. Recent access from unauthorized location has been noted. My blood ran cold. Whoever was behind this knew that someone different had accessed the account. They had connected my old Hotmail to my current Gmail. They knew who I was. That same night, I noticed something strange while watching Netflix on my laptop. The webcam light briefly flickered on, then off. It could have been a glitch, but combined with the email, it sent me into a panic. I covered the camera with tape, but the damage to my peace of mind was done. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. I was convinced my devices had been compromised, that someone was watching me through my own technology. I started unplugging my router at night, covering all camera lenses, even disconnecting my smart TV. 2 weeks after the missed payment email, I came home from work to find my flat had been broken into. Nothing valuable was taken, not my laptop, not my TV, not even the cash I kept in my desk drawer. The only thing disturbed was my bedside table, where my diary had been moved. I reported the break-in to the police, but without anything stolen, they didn't seem particularly concerned. I didn't tell them about the emails or the website. It seemed too disconnected, too paranoid. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the building, every passing car outside sent my heart racing. Around 3 a.m., I got up to make tea and noticed my laptop was open on the kitchen table, not where I'd left it, and certainly not how I'd left it. On the screen was a text document containing addresses and personal information about the people I'd seen in those videos. Below their information was my own, my full name, address, workplace, parents' address, and the routes I typically took to work. At the bottom was a simple message: witnesses are participants. Participants are responsible. I packed a bag and left that night, staying with a friend while I looked for a new place to live. I told everyone I'd had a plumbing disaster in my flat that made it uninhabitable. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media, even considered changing jobs. It's been 5 months since then. I've moved twice, switching cities entirely the second time. I live completely offline now. No social media, no cloud storage, no smart devices. I'm writing this on a new laptop that has never been connected to my name in any way. But sometimes I still see the webcam light flicker when I'm working late. Sometimes I receive blank emails from addresses I don't recognize. And last week, I found a note on my car windscreen with just an Onion URL written on it. Different from the original one, but unmistakably similar in format. I don't know who these people are or why they chose my forgotten email account for their operation. I don't know if they're still watching those unsuspecting people or if they're now watching me instead. All I know is that somewhere in the vastness of the dark web, there are people who consider me a loose end that needs tying up. So if you ever find something unexpected while clearing out your digital junk, something that doesn't quite make sense, something that perhaps wasn't meant for you, delete it, close it, forget you ever saw it. Because once you've seen something you shouldn't, there's no going back. And in the dark corners of the internet, there are people who will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their secrets. Have you ever left a review online? I used to, occasionally, when something seemed worth commenting on. A restaurant that was particularly good or notably disappointing. A shop that went above and beyond or completely failed to deliver. Nothing elaborate, just a few stars and a couple of sentences. The sort of casual feedback that takes 30 seconds to write and then you forget about it. Last year, I left one review that was slightly more critical than usual. Still perfectly reasonable, I thought. Just honest about a meal that hadn't lived up to expectations. That's it. That one review is the reason I can't use my real name online anymore. Why I've closed all my social media accounts, and why I still receive anonymous messages containing photographs of my house taken from angles I didn't know were possible. I'm a dental hygienist working at a private practice in Cambridge. Been there for about 6 years now. I live in a terraced house on the outskirts of the city with my partner Rachel and our 2 cats. We're both in our early 30s, reasonably settled. The sort of people who have mortgage payments and pension contributions and think about things like garden maintenance. Normal, boring, exactly the kind of life where a restaurant review shouldn't matter at all. The restaurant in question was a new place that opened near the city centre last year, marketed as fine dining with a Mediterranean fusion concept. Rachel had booked us a table for our anniversary, drawn in by the glossy website and the promotional reviews from local food bloggers. The meal cost nearly £200 for the 2 of us. Expensive by our standards, but supposedly worth it for a special occasion. The experience was disappointing from the start. We waited 40 minutes past our booking time to be seated. The food was mediocre at best. Nothing like the elaborate dishes shown in the website photos. My main course arrived barely warm, and when I mentioned it to the waiter, he shrugged and said the kitchen was busy. Rachel's meal had ingredients listed on the menu that simply weren't present on the plate. We left feeling we'd wasted money we couldn't really afford on an evening that was meant to be memorable for better reasons. A few days later, I wrote an honest review on one of the major restaurant review websites. I explained what we'd experienced, noting the long wait, the quality issues, the dismissive service. I wasn't cruel or personal about it, didn't name staff members or use inflammatory language. I just described what had happened and said I wouldn't recommend the restaurant based on our visit. I gave it 2 stars out of 5, which seemed fair given the price and the promises they'd made. The review was posted under my real name, which the platform required for verified reviews. I didn't think anything of it at the time. It was just a restaurant review, the sort of consumer feedback that businesses should expect when they charge premium prices and under-deliver. I'd left dozens of reviews over the years for various businesses, all under my real name, never having any issues. Within days, I started receiving messages. They came through various platforms, the review website itself, my Facebook account, my email address, even my LinkedIn profile, which I barely used. The messages all followed a similar pattern, accusing me of lying about my experience, suggesting I was trying to damage a small business unfairly, demanding I remove my review immediately. Some messages were more aggressive than others. A few contained thinly veiled threats about consequences if I didn't take the review down. Others tried a different approach, claiming the restaurant owner was a single mother struggling to build a business, and my review was personally devastating to her family. The tactics varied, but the goal was always the same. They wanted my review deleted. I initially assumed these messages were from the restaurant owner or staff members, upset about negative feedback. It's not uncommon for businesses to respond defensively to criticism, even if it's legitimate. I reported the more threatening messages to the platforms they came through and otherwise tried to ignore them. My review was honest, and I had no intention of removing it just because someone didn't like what I'd written. Then the messages started including personal information, details about where I worked, which dental practice employed me, what time my shift typically started. One message mentioned my partner by name and described the car she drove. Another referenced our house, giving the street name and mentioning the distinctive blue door we'd painted the previous summer. That's when I started feeling genuinely concerned. These weren't just angry business owners or defensive staff. Someone had researched me extensively, gathering information from various sources to create a detailed picture of my life. The messages had made it clear this information wasn't just passively collected. It was intended to intimidate me, to make me feel watched and vulnerable. I reported everything to the police. They took a statement, but explained that unless someone made explicit threats or engaged in sustained harassment that met legal thresholds, there wasn't much they could do. Sending messages that mentioned publicly available information wasn't itself illegal, however unsettling it felt. They advised me to make my social media accounts private and be cautious about my online presence. I did exactly that, locking down all my accounts and removing as much personal information as I could find. I also noticed that my restaurant review had accumulated dozens of comments, all attacking my credibility and character. People I'd never heard of claimed I was a competitor trying to sabotage a legitimate business. Others said they'd seen me behaving badly at the restaurant and that I'd invented my complaints. The comments were clearly coordinated, all posted within a short time frame, all using similar language patterns. What I didn't understand was why a restaurant would go to such lengths over a single negative review. The place had other reviews, some positive and some critical like mine. It wasn't as though my one review could destroy their business, especially since other customers had mentioned similar experiences. The response seemed wildly disproportionate to the perceived offense. Rachel suggested I just delete the review to make the whole situation go away. Part of me wanted to, just to stop the messages and get back to normal life. But another part felt stubborn about not being bullied into removing honest feedback. We compromised by me contacting the review platform to explain what was happening and asking if they could hide my personal information while keeping the review active. The platform support team was sympathetic but limited in what they could do. They removed my last name from the review and disabled comments on it, but they couldn't completely anonymize it without violating their verification policies. They also mentioned that several other reviewers who'd criticized this particular restaurant had reported similar harassment, suggesting this was part of a pattern rather than an isolated incident. That information should have made me feel less alone, but instead it worried me more. If multiple people were being targeted like this, it suggested the restaurant had resources and systems in place for dealing with negative reviews that went far beyond normal business responses. It implied organization and deliberate strategy rather than just emotional reactions to criticism. About 3 weeks after the harassment started, I discovered my home address had been posted on the dark web. A colleague at work who had some technical knowledge helped me access the relevant sites after I explained what had been happening. She showed me how to navigate these hidden spaces, warning me that what I might find wouldn't be pleasant. My My address was listed on a site that specialized in what they called reputation management services. The listing included my full name, home address, workplace, daily routine information, photos of my house and car, and detailed personal information about Rachel and me. It was presented as a dossier available for purchase, marketed to people interested in correcting what the site termed unjust online criticism of businesses. The listing made it clear what was being offered. For a fee, people could purchase access to comprehensive information about individuals who'd left negative reviews of certain businesses. The information could be used for various purposes, all of them designed to pressure reviewers into removing their criticism. The site didn't explicitly endorse harassment or violence, but the intended use was obvious from how the information was packaged and presented. My dossier had been purchased multiple times already. The site included a counter showing how many people had bought access to my information, and the number was in the 20s. 20 different people had paid money for detailed intelligence about my life, all because I'd left an honest review about a mediocre restaurant meal. But my information wasn't alone on the site. There were hundreds of similar dossiers, all targeting people who'd left negative reviews of various businesses across the UK. The site organized them by region and by the type of business reviewed, making it easy for restaurant owners or their representatives to find information about their critics. Some dossiers were more detailed than others, but they all included enough personal information to enable serious harassment or worse. The site also featured a messaging system where buyers could coordinate their activities. I could see discussions about my review specifically, with people planning how to pressure me into deleting it. Some suggested sending more threatening messages. Others proposed showing up at my workplace or home. A few discussed more subtle psychological tactics designed to make me feel unsafe without doing anything obviously illegal. Reading through these discussions was surreal and terrifying. These were real people, casually planning ways to intimidate me and disrupt my life, all over a restaurant review. The casual tone of their messages made it worse somehow. The way they discussed harassment strategies like they were planning a mild inconvenience rather than a campaign of psychological warfare. The police took this development more seriously. Evidence of organized harassment through dark web coordination met thresholds they could actually investigate. They seized my computer to document what we'd found and opened a formal investigation into the reputation management site and the people using it. The investigation revealed that the site was operated by a company offering what they marketed as online reputation services to businesses. For fees ranging from a few hundred to several £1,000s, they'd identify critics, compile detailed dossiers on them, and either harass them directly or provide information to clients who wanted to handle it themselves. The restaurant I'd reviewed was just one of dozens of businesses using their services. What made it particularly insidious was that the harassment was crowdsourced. The company would create the dossiers, but actual intimidation was carried out by multiple individuals who'd purchased access to the information. This made it extremely difficult to trace any single incident back to the company or the business that had commissioned the dossier. Each harassing message or threat could be dismissed as an isolated incident by a random internet user, even though they were all coordinated through the dark web marketplace. The company operating the site was eventually prosecuted, though the charges were complicated by the fact that they technically only provided information rather than directly engaging in harassment. Several individuals who'd purchased access to dossiers and sent threatening messages were also charged, but many remained anonymous and untraceable. The site itself was shut down, but police confirmed similar services continued operating elsewhere. My dossier presumably still exists in private collections of people who downloaded it before the site was closed. The photos of my house, the details about my routine, the personal information about Rachel, all of that is still out there somewhere, saved on devices I'll never identify, potentially being shared through networks I can't access. We moved house about 6 months after all this happened. Not just because of the harassment, though that was certainly a factor. The knowledge that our home had been photographed and analyzed, that strangers had discussed showing up there, made it impossible to feel safe. Our new address is carefully guarded. We don't link it to our names online anywhere. We have security cameras. We're hypervigilant about maintaining privacy. I deleted the review eventually, not because the harassment achieved its intended goal, but because I wanted to remove any reason for people to continue targeting me. The review website understood and didn't penalize me for removing it. They also implemented new policies about protecting reviewers from retaliation, though I'm not sure how effective those policies can be given how much personal information is inherently shared when leaving verified reviews. What haunts me most is thinking about all the other people whose dossiers appeared on that site, most of whom probably never discovered they'd been targeted. How many honest reviewers faced harassment without ever understanding it was coordinated? How many deleted reviews under pressure without knowing about the dark web marketplace facilitating their intimidation? How many moved house or changed jobs, or lived in fear because they'd exercised their right to share legitimate consumer experiences? The restaurant closed down about a year after all this happened, not because of my review or anyone else's, but because they genuinely weren't very good. The space was taken over by a different restaurant that actually delivers on its promises and treats customers properly. I've never left a review for them, even though they deserve positive recognition. I can't bring myself to leave restaurant reviews anymore, can't participate in consumer feedback systems that should be helpful, but turned out to be dangerous. That's what I think about now when I see negative reviews online. Not whether they're fair or accurate, but whether the person who wrote them has any idea what they might have exposed themselves to. Whether their honest feedback about a disappointing meal or poor service has resulted in their home being photographed, their routine being documented, their personal information being compiled and sold to strangers who view intimidation as a business service worth paying for. I left a bad review once. Just one honest assessment of a genuinely poor experience at a restaurant that charged premium prices and delivered mediocre results. That review led to organized harassment, dark web dossiers, personal threats, and ultimately having to move house and reconstruct our digital lives. All because I thought consumer feedback was meant to be honest and that businesses should be accountable for the experiences they provide. The asymmetry of it still bothers me. A restaurant can take your money, serve you poorly, treat you dismissively, and you're supposed to just accept it. But if you honestly describe what happened in a review, you become a target. Your home gets photographed, your routine gets analyzed, your life gets disrupted by people who view your criticism as an attack that justifies retaliation. I've learned to stay silent now, to keep my opinions private, to avoid participating in the feedback systems that theoretically make markets more efficient and businesses more accountable. It's safer that way, less vulnerable, though it means bad businesses continue operating without the public accountability they deserve. That's what they want, of course. That's the entire purpose of services like the one that targeted me, to silence honest criticism through intimidation and make consumers afraid to share their genuine experiences. So I stay quiet now, and I suspect many others do too after experiencing similar harassment. We move through our consumer lives pretending everything is fine, leaving only positive reviews, if we leave any at all, never mentioning when we've been disappointed or mistreated. Not because businesses have improved, but because we've learned that honesty has consequences that extend far beyond a simple online review. That restaurant review cost me £200 for a mediocre meal, and thousands of pounds in moving costs, security systems, and psychological counselling. It cost me my sense of safety in my own home and my willingness to participate honestly in consumer feedback systems. All for being truthful about an experience that genuinely happened, written in measured language, posted where such reviews are meant to be shared. I left a bad review once, and I'll never make that mistake again. The scariest moments often begin with the most ordinary actions. 5 months ago, I was just looking for a charger in my brother's room, but what I found changed everything I thought I knew about him, about our family, about the thin line between curiosity and danger. I was home from university for the summer break, staying in my childhood bedroom that had been partially converted into a storage space since I'd moved out. My younger brother Jake was 16 at the time, in that phase where privacy becomes sacred territory. He'd always been quiet, more comfortable with technology than people, spending hours in his room playing games or coding, or whatever it was that kept him glued to his screens. We'd never been especially close. The 4-year age gap meant we'd always existed in different social worlds, but we got along well enough. That afternoon, I'd been watching Netflix on my laptop when the battery died, and my charger was nowhere to be found. My parents were both at work, and Jake was at football practice, so I figured I'd borrow his. I knew he kept a spare one in his desk drawer because I'd seen him grab it once when we were leaving for a family trip. I didn't think he'd mind. It wasn't like I was snooping through his things, just grabbing a charger. His room was surprisingly tidy for a teenage boy. Bed made, clothes put away, desk organized with his laptop closed and his tablet propped up on a stand. The tablet was still on, screen dim but not locked. I opened his desk drawer and found the charger easily enough, but as I was about to leave, the tablet screen lit up with a notification. I didn't mean to look, honestly. It was just one of those automatic things where your eyes are drawn to sudden movement. The notification was from an app I didn't recognize, something with a dark icon hidden in a folder labeled Games 2. I probably would have ignored it completely if not for the preview text. Package confirmed. Coordinates uploaded. Something about the wording struck me as odd. Not like a normal game notification about completed quests or energy refills. I hesitated for a moment, feeling that boundary between respecting his privacy and a growing sense of concern. Jake had been acting differently lately, more secretive, staying up until strange hours, occasionally receiving packages he'd quickly hide away. Our mum had chalked it up to typical teenage behavior, but something about those small changes had been nagging at me. I tapped the folder, labeled Games 2. Inside were several apps that looked like standard games, the kinds with colorful icons and generic names. But among them was one that stood out. A dark blue icon with a simple T logo. I recognized it immediately as Tor, the browser commonly used to access the dark web. My stomach tightened. I'd read enough articles and seen enough documentaries to know what the dark web was, that hidden part of the internet where illegal marketplaces thrived. What was my 16-year-old brother doing with a Tor browser? Maybe he was just curious, I told myself. Maybe it was for a school project on internet security or digital privacy. I should have put the tablet down right then. Should have taken the charger and left, maybe mentioned it casually to Jake later. But instead, I tapped the Tor icon. It opened immediately, no password, no fingerprint required. He'd left himself logged in. The browser opened to what looked like a marketplace, dark background, simple text links, product listings with Bitcoin prices. My heart rate quickened as I realized I was looking at a page selling illegal substances, various pills, powders, and plants, all categorized and rated by users like some twisted version of Amazon. I scrolled through the page, feeling increasingly ill. Was Jake buying drugs? He'd never shown any signs of substance abuse. No dilated pupils, no mood swings, no missing money. He was still getting top marks in school, still attending his coding club. It didn't make sense. Then I noticed he was logged into an account. The username Quantum Shift appeared in the corner with a small inbox icon showing unread messages. The privacy boundary was now a distant memory as I tapped on the inbox, driven by growing concern for my brother. The messages loaded, showing a conversation between Quantum Shift and someone called Vendox 3. As I read through them, confusion gave way to dawning horror. Jake wasn't buying drugs. He was selling something called access packages. From what I could piece together, he was offering live feeds into people's homes, their security cameras, baby monitors, laptops, and phones. The messages discuss prices for different access levels and durations of entertainment. Vendor X3 was apparently a middleman who connected Jake with clients willing to pay for these access packages. My hands were shaking now. This couldn't be right. My quiet, awkward brother, who still collected Pokemon cards, couldn't be hacking into people's devices and selling access to strangers. But the evidence was right there in front of me. Detailed instructions on how to access specific cameras, usernames and passwords for various accounts. Even screenshots showing living rooms, bedrooms and other private spaces. I scrolled further and found a folder labeled Inventory. Inside were dozens of files, each named with what looked like postcodes. I clicked on one at random and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a document containing everything about a family living just 3 streets away from us. Their names, ages, work schedules, the layout of their home, their Wi-Fi password, and links to access their various connected devices. There were notes about their routines when they were typically out of the house, and even details about a hidden spare key. At the bottom was a disturbing note. Premium package, £350 per month. Full access plus entry potential. I recognized the family's name. They had a daughter in year 7, the same school Jake attended. Their son played on the same football team. These weren't random targets. These were people we knew. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How had Jake done this? He was good with computers, sure, but this level of hacking seemed beyond a teenager's capabilities. Had he found some exploit? Learned from someone online? More importantly, did he understand the full implications of what he was doing? I nearly dropped the tablet when I heard the front door open downstairs. Jake was home early. I quickly closed the browser, put the tablet back exactly as I'd found it, and grabbed the charger. I was halfway to the door when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. We nearly collided in the hallway. His face registered surprise, then suspicion. I held up the charger, mumbling something about borrowing it, trying to keep my voice steady despite the typhoon of thoughts swirling in my head. He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly, tracking my movements with unusual intensity. Had he always looked at people that way, and I just never noticed? Back in my room, I paced back and forth, unsure what to do. Tell our parents, confront Jake directly, call the police. This wasn't some harmless teenage rebellion or victimless crime. He was violating people's privacy in the most fundamental way, potentially putting them at risk of theft, stalking, or worse. I decided to gather more information before doing anything drastic. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to Jake's behavior. I noticed things I'd overlooked before, how he would sometimes stop typing when someone walked behind him, how he had multiple external hard drives hidden throughout his room, how he would take phone calls outside where no one could hear. One night, I pretended to be asleep when he crept downstairs at 2 a.m. I followed silently and watched from the stairwell as he opened our neighbor's garden gate, using gloves despite the warm summer night. He placed a small device, barely larger than a pound coin, under their garden bench, then returned home, looking around carefully before coming inside. The next morning, I searched online and discovered the device was likely a Wi-Fi repeater or signal interceptor. My technical knowledge was limited, but from what I could understand, he was creating a network of devices to help him access home systems remotely. I was in over my head, terrified of what my brother was involved in, but equally scared of what might happen to him if I reported him. Would he go to juvenile detention? Would this follow him forever? Was there a way to stop him without destroying his future? A week after my discovery, I came home to find Jake sitting in my room, my laptop open in front of him. His face was emotionless as he turned the screen toward me. On it was my search history, how to report cybercrime, what happens to underage hackers, Wi-Fi signal interceptors illegal. "You went through my tablet," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. Not a question, a statement. He stood up, closing the laptop. "You don't understand what you've seen." I tried to explain that I was worried about him, that he was committing serious crimes, but he just smiled, a cold expression I'd never seen on my little brother before. He told me he wasn't just some script kiddie playing around. He had connections now, people who valued his skills, who would be very unhappy if his operation was compromised. Then he showed me something on his phone, a live feed of our parents' bedroom, their bathroom, their car. He scrolled through more feeds. My university accommodation, my friend's flat, my girlfriend's house. Places I'd been, bringing my devices, unknowingly carrying his malware wherever I went. "I've been practicing on our family first," he explained, as casually as if discussing a school project. "It's easier to test new methods on familiar networks." His expression hardened. "If you say anything to anyone, all of this data gets uploaded to my clients, every private moment, every conversation, everything." That was 5 months ago. I've since returned to university, trying to maintain the illusion that everything is normal. Jake acts like our conversation never happened when we speak on the phone or during video calls. But sometimes, when my laptop camera light flickers for no reason, or my phone restarts unexpectedly, I'm reminded that my brother is always watching. I've disconnected most of my devices, bought covers for every camera, and used public computers for anything important. But I know it's not enough. The dark web has given a 16-year-old boy power that no one should have, and I'm trapped by the consequences of his actions and my discovery. What terrifies me most isn't just that Jake is spying on people, it's that he's selling what he sees to strangers with unknown intentions. Every day, I wonder what those clients are doing with their access packages. Are they just voyeurs, or are they planning something worse? And how many other families are living with their own Jake? Someone they trust who has secretly turned their private lives into commodities on the dark web marketplace. I don't know how this ends. I don't know how to save my brother from what he's becoming, or how to protect the people he's targeting. I only know that the line between the dark web and our everyday lives is much thinner than we want to believe. And sometimes, the most dangerous predator isn't some anonymous hacker on the other side of the world. Sometimes, it's the quiet teenager down the hall, the one who knows your routines, your passwords, and exactly when you'll be most vulnerable. Have you ever given away furniture you didn't need anymore? I have. About 18 months ago, I put an old sofa and chest of drawers up for free collection, just getting rid of things that were taking up space after I'd bought replacements. You know how it is, seemed more responsible than paying for a skip, and someone else might get some use out of them. One of those small, practical decisions you make without giving it much thought. The sort of thing people do all the time. Except those pieces of furniture I gave away apparently never left my house. At least, that's what several people believe. People who spent money purchasing detailed inventories of my possessions that were compiled over the past year and a half. Inventories that still list items I got rid of, photographed and catalogued whilst they were still sitting in my living room, before I had any idea what that collection visit was really about. I'm a librarian working at a county library in Nottingham. I've been there for around 9 years now, mostly managing the children's section and organising reading programs during school holidays. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor of a converted mill building near the canal. It's quiet, affordable, close enough to walk to work on decent days. I've lived there for nearly 5 years, long enough that I've stopped really noticing the space and just exist in it comfortably. The furniture situation came up because I'd finally saved enough to replace some pieces I'd inherited from my grandmother when she passed away. Perfectly functional items, but heavy, outdated, not really my style. The sofa was one of those floral pattern things from the 80s, sturdy but hideous. The chest of drawers was solid oak, nice enough but too large for my bedroom. I wanted something lighter, more modern, and I needed to get rid of the old furniture before the new pieces were delivered. I posted both items on a local website that facilitates free collections. You put up photos and descriptions, people respond if they're interested, and you arrange a time for them to collect. I'd used the site before for giving away books and kitchen items, and it had always worked straightforwardly. Within a day, I had several responses, and I arranged for someone to collect both pieces on the following Saturday afternoon. The person who came to collect was a man in his 40s, pleasant enough, arrived with a van, and a younger lad, who helped him carry things down the stairs. He introduced himself as Mark, said he was refurbishing a property and could use the furniture for staging. We chatted briefly whilst they loaded the van. He commented on how nice my flat was, the high ceilings and large windows that come with converted industrial buildings. Asked how long I'd lived there, whether I enjoyed the area. That sort of polite conversation people make whilst accomplishing practical tasks. They took the furniture and left, and I thought nothing more about it. My new sofa and drawers arrived the following week, and I got on with arranging them and enjoying the updated look of my flat. The whole transaction had taken maybe 30 minutes of my time total, and I felt good about keeping usable furniture out of landfill. About 2 months later, I started noticing odd things around the flat. Nothing dramatic, just small details that seemed off. A book on my shelf that I was certain I'd moved was back in its original position. A mug in my cupboard placed handle left when I always positioned them handle right. The bathroom window left slightly open when I was sure I'd closed it before leaving for work. I convinced myself I was just being forgetful, that I'd moved these things and not remembered doing so. Working long hours during the summer reading challenge at the library, I was tired and probably not paying proper attention to small details at home. Everyone has moments where they question whether they've done something or just thought about doing it. Then I found a hairpin on my bathroom floor. I have short hair and never use hairpins. None of my friends who'd visited recently used them either. It was just there, a plain metal hairpin that hadn't been present when I'd cleaned the bathroom a few days earlier. I picked it up and stared at it, trying to think of any reasonable explanation for how it had appeared. Around the same time, my neighbor mentioned she'd seen someone in the building's entrance hall late one evening, someone she didn't recognize who'd been standing by the mailboxes looking at the flat numbers. She'd assumed they were visiting someone and hadn't thought much of it, but she mentioned it casually because the building was usually quite secure and she wasn't used to seeing strangers. I started paying more attention to my flat after that, making note of exactly how I left things before going to work. I took photos of my bookshelf arrangement, my kitchen cupboards, the position of items on my bathroom counter. When I came home, I'd compare the photos to what I found. Small changes kept appearing. A chair pulled out slightly from the dining table, a coat in my wardrobe hanging on a different hook, my bedroom curtains positioned differently than I'd left them. Someone was entering my flat whilst I was at work, not taking anything, not leaving obvious evidence, just moving through the space and touching things in ways that made their presence known. It felt like a deliberate campaign to make me feel unsafe, to demonstrate that my home wasn't actually private or secure. I changed my locks, which wasn't cheap given the building's security requirements. I installed a small camera in my living room, one of those basic devices that connects to your phone and records when motion is detected. For several days, nothing unusual appeared on the footage, just me leaving in the morning and returning in the evening, the flat empty and undisturbed in between. Then I reviewed footage from a Wednesday afternoon and found what I'd been dreading. Someone had entered my flat around 2 in the afternoon, during a time when I was reliably at work. They'd moved through the space systematically, not searching for valuables, but appearing to document everything. They'd opened drawers and cupboards, examined items on shelves, looked through papers on my desk. They'd spent nearly an hour in my flat before leaving. The figure was wearing gloves and a cap pulled low, making identification difficult. But what disturbed me most was how familiar they seemed with the layout. They moved confidently, knowing where rooms were without hesitation, opening cupboards and drawers like they already knew what they'd find inside. This wasn't someone's first visit. They'd been here before, multiple times probably, learning the space well enough to navigate it comfortably. I took the footage to the police. They treated it seriously, sending officers to check my flat for signs of forced entry and taking statements about the incidents I'd noticed. They couldn't find any evidence of how the person had gained access. The locks showed no signs of tampering. The windows were all secure. There was no obvious method of entry that forensics could identify. A detective assigned to my case asked detailed questions about my daily routine, who had access to my flat, whether I'd given keys to anyone recently. I mentioned the furniture collection from a few months earlier, the man named Mark who'd been inside my flat to collect the items. The detective made notes and said they'd look into it, though she seemed doubtful a casual furniture collection could be connected to break-ins months later. About a week after reporting the break-in, I received a message through Facebook from an account I didn't recognize. It contained only a link, no text or explanation. The profile was anonymous, created recently, with no posts or friends. Every instinct told me not to click the link, but I needed to understand what was happening. I copied the link and searched for information about it, discovering it led to an address on the dark web. I spent an evening researching how to access these hidden websites, eventually managing to navigate to the address from that message. What I found made me feel physically sick. It was a marketplace specializing in what they called residential intelligence services, detailed inventories of people's homes compiled through physical access and surveillance, available for purchase by anyone interested. My flat was listed there. The inventory included photographs of every room, detailed lists of my possessions, notes about the layout and security measures. But what made it especially disturbing was how comprehensive the documentation was. The listing included information about my daily routine, what time I left for work, when I typically returned, what days I was most reliably absent from the flat. The photographs showed things I'd given away months ago. The floral sofa, the oak chest of drawers, both clearly visible in images supposedly documenting my current possessions. The inventory lists also referenced these items, describing them in detail as though they were still present in my home. Someone had photographed and catalogued my flat before I changed the furniture, and they'd been selling that information to buyers who had no idea it was partially outdated. But the listing had been updated recently. New photographs showed my replacement furniture, with notes explaining that the residence had been redecorated, but the layout and security remained unchanged. Buyers who purchased the original inventory were being offered updated information at a discount, essentially a subscription service for detailed intelligence about my private living space. The marketplace showed my listing had been purchased around 15 times. 15 different people had paid money for detailed information about my flat, my possessions, my routine. The site included buyer feedback, comments from previous purchasers rating the accuracy and usefulness of the information. Several mentioned using it for planning purposes. Others praised the quality of the photographs and the detail of the inventory lists. Some comments were more specific and deeply unsettling. One buyer mentioned they'd successfully accessed the residence during the time frame listed and confirmed the information was reliable. Another discussed using the floor plan to plan entry and exit routes. A third commented that the target's routine was predictable enough to allow for extended visits without risk of discovery. These weren't people planning burglaries in any traditional sense. They weren't looking for valuable items to steal quickly and sell on. They were purchasing access to private spaces, opportunities to enter someone's home and spend time there whilst the occupant was away. The marketplace facilitated a specific type of violation, selling the ability to walk through a stranger's bedroom, examine their belongings, exist in their private space without their knowledge or consent. The detective I'd been working with became much more engaged when I showed her what I'd found. This type of organized residential access service was something their cybercrime unit had been tracking but struggling to infiltrate. The fact that I'd been sent a direct link to my own listing suggested whoever was running the operation wanted me to know what was happening, perhaps as intimidation or as a way of advertising their services to others who might be interested. The investigation revealed that the furniture collection had been the method of initial access and intelligence gathering. The man who'd collected my items, whoever he really was, had used that legitimate visit to photograph my flat, note the layout, potentially copy my keys or test locks to determine how easily they could be bypassed later. The furniture itself was irrelevant. It had just been an excuse to gain entry and spend time examining a space that would later be documented and sold. They'd been operating this scheme across the East Midlands for over a year, responding to furniture collection posts and using those visits to gather residential intelligence. Most victims never knew anything had happened beyond giving away unwanted items. Only a few, like me, had noticed the subsequent intrusions and made the connection to that initial visit. The police arrested 3 people involved in the operation, though the person I'd known as Mark wasn't among them. That name had obviously been fake, and the van's registration had been cloned from a legitimate vehicle. The marketplace itself was shut down temporarily, but apparently resurfaced elsewhere within weeks. My listing was presumably copied and preserved before the site was taken down, still circulating somewhere in spaces I can't access. I moved out of that flat within 2 months of discovering the marketplace. I couldn't stay somewhere that had been so thoroughly documented and sold to strangers. Knowing that around 15 people had purchased detailed information about my home, that some of them had used that information to enter whilst I was at work, that photographs of my bedroom and bathroom were saved on devices I'd never locate. It was too much. My new flat is on the ground floor of a different building, deliberately chosen for better security and less privacy risk. I've installed extensive security measures, and I'm hyper-vigilant about who I allow inside. I'll never give away furniture through collection websites again. Never allow strangers into my home for any reason, no matter how innocent the purpose seems. But I know my old flat's documentation still exists somewhere. The photographs, the inventory lists, the detailed notes about layout and routine, all preserved in private collections and possibly still being traded through marketplaces I'll never find. The new tenants who moved in after me have no idea their home was professionally catalogued and sold online. That detailed instructions for accessing it exist in multiple hands. I think about warning them sometimes, explaining what happened so they can take precautions. But how do you tell strangers that their home has been mapped out and sold to people interested in entering it without permission? How do you prove something that exists only in hidden corners of the internet and in private collections you can't access? So instead, I stay silent, and I live more carefully now, questioning every interaction that might involve giving someone access to my space. I've learned that generosity has risks I never considered, that the simple act of giving away unwanted furniture can be exploited by people who see residential access as a commodity worth documenting and selling. The furniture I gave away is probably in a landfill now, or maybe it really is staging a property somewhere like Mark claimed. I'll never know, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the 30 minutes I spent allowing strangers into my home to collect those items led to months of violations, to discovering my private space had been sold to multiple buyers, to ultimately having to abandon a flat I'd lived in comfortably for years. I gave away furniture I didn't need anymore, just a sofa and a chest of drawers, free to whoever wanted them, collected by someone who seemed perfectly ordinary and legitimate. That simple transaction led to professional documentation of my entire living space, systematic intrusions whilst I was at work, and the permanent knowledge that detailed inventories of my possessions and habits exist somewhere I can't control or eliminate. That's what I think about now when I see furniture listed for free collection online. Not whether the items are worth saving from landfill or whether someone could use them, but whether the person posting realizes what they might be inviting into their home. Whether they understand that a legitimate seeming collection visit could be cover for something much darker, something that continues long after the furniture has been taken away. I gave away furniture once, and that decision cost me my sense of security, my home, and my willingness to trust ordinary transactions that should be straightforward and safe. All because I didn't realize that some people view access to private spaces as valuable enough to systematically exploit, document, and sell to strangers who have reasons of their own for wanting detailed information about how someone lives when they think they're alone. won something once, or at least I thought I had. It was one of those online competitions you enter without really expecting anything to come of it, the sort where you provide your email address and answer a few questions for a chance at winning a holiday or a voucher. I can't even remember now which competition it was specifically, just that I'd entered several around the same time, and one of them had apparently selected me as a winner. That moment of unexpected good luck is the reason I now sleep with my curtains drawn, my phone on silent, and a growing sense that I'm being watched in ways I'll never fully understand. I'm a hairdresser working at a salon in Leicester. Been there for around 8 years now. It's a good job, steady clientele. The kind of work where you get to know people over time through their regular appointments. I rent a small flat above a chip shop on a busy road near the city centre. Nothing fancy, but it's affordable and convenient for getting to work. I live alone. Always have preferred it that way, though that independence feels more like vulnerability now. The email about winning the competition arrived on a Saturday morning last spring. I'd been entering various online competitions for months, mostly out of boredom during quiet evenings at home. Gift vouchers, spa days, weekend breaks, the kind of prizes that seemed appealing but unlikely. The email said I'd won a luxury hamper worth around £300, filled with premium foods and wines, and I just needed to confirm my delivery details. The message looked legitimate enough. Professional formatting, a logo I vaguely recognized from one of the competition websites I'd visited, congratulatory language that seemed genuine. It asked me to click a link to verify my details and select a delivery date. I did exactly that, pleased with my unexpected luck and already mentally planning who I'd share the hamper contents with. The verification form asked for standard delivery information. My full name and address, obviously, but also a phone number in case the courier needed to contact me. Then it asked about my availability for delivery, wanting to know which days I typically worked, what hours I was usually home, whether I had neighbors who could accept packages on my behalf. It explained that the hamper contained perishable items and needed to be delivered when someone would definitely be available to receive it. I provided all the information requested. My work schedule at the salon, the fact that I worked Tuesday through Saturday, that I was usually home by 7 in the evening on work days and all day Sunday and Monday. I mentioned I didn't really know my neighbors well enough to have them accept deliveries, and that the best time would be Sunday afternoon when I was definitely home. The form also asked about dietary restrictions and preferences, supposedly so they could tailor the hamper contents appropriately. I answered those questions too, noting that I was vegetarian, that I didn't drink red wine, that I had a mild allergy to nuts. It seemed like good customer service, making sure the prize would actually be something I could enjoy, rather than a generic selection. A confirmation email arrived within minutes, thanking me for providing my details and saying the hamper would be delivered within 2 weeks. I felt satisfied and lucky, the small rush of pleasure that comes from winning something unexpected, even if it wasn't life-changing. The hamper never arrived. After 3 weeks, I tried to follow up using the email address from the original message, but my emails bounced back as undeliverable. I searched for the competition website I thought I'd entered, but I couldn't find it anymore. I checked my browser history, but I'd entered so many different competitions that I couldn't identify which specific one had supposedly selected me as a winner. I eventually accepted that it had probably been a scam, annoyed with myself for falling for it, but assuming the worst consequence would be some spam emails. I hadn't provided bank details or anything that could be used for direct financial fraud, just delivery information and personal preferences. It seemed like an elaborate scam for relatively minimal payoff. but I figured the scammers had probably sent the same email to thousands of people hoping to collect data they could sell to marketing companies. About a month later, I started noticing a car parked on my street that I didn't recognize. A dark blue Vauxhall, usually parked a few spaces down from my building, often there when I left for work and still there when I returned. I didn't think much of it initially. Parking on my street was always competitive, and residents often left cars in the same spots for days at a time. Then I started seeing the same car in other locations, parked near the salon where I worked, visible from the window where I spent most of my day cutting hair, parked outside the supermarket I usually shopped at on Sunday mornings, parked near the bus stop I used when visiting my mum across town. The same dark blue Vauxhall, or at least what appeared to be the same one, showing up in too many places to be coincidental. I tried to get a look at the driver, but the windows were tinted enough that I could only make out vague shapes inside. I never saw anyone get in or out of the car, never caught a clear view of who was driving. It was just there, persistently present in locations where I spent time, watching without ever doing anything overtly threatening. I reported it to the police, explaining that I believed someone was following me. They took a statement and said they'd increase patrols in my area, but they were honest about how difficult it was to act on these situations. Following someone wasn't itself illegal unless it crossed into harassment or stalking territory, and I didn't have evidence of threats or direct contact. They took down the registration number I'd managed to note, but when they checked it, the car was registered to a leasing company with multiple vehicles on their fleet. Tracing who was actually driving at any given time would be nearly impossible. The car eventually stopped appearing, or at least I stopped noticing it after a few weeks. I told myself I'd been paranoid, that it was probably someone who happened to live and work in similar areas to me, that the pattern I'd seen was just coincidence amplified by anxiety. Then other things started happening, small things at first, easy to dismiss individually, but forming a pattern that became harder to ignore. I'd find my rubbish bin moved from where I'd left it, positioned differently than I remembered. The position of my doormat would be slightly off, as though someone had lifted it and replaced it carelessly. Once I found a cigarette stub near my door, even though I didn't smoke and neither did any of my neighbors as far as I knew. Inside my flat, I'd noticed minor changes that could have been my own forgetfulness, but felt wrong. A kitchen cupboard left slightly ajar when I was certain I'd closed it. A book moved on my shelf, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it wasn't where I'd last placed it. My bathroom window left unlatched when I always kept it locked. I started documenting these incidents, taking photos of how I left things so I could compare them when I returned. The documentation confirmed I wasn't imagining it. Things were being moved, adjusted, interfered with while I was out. Someone had access to my flat, entering and leaving without forcing locks or breaking windows, just subtle enough that each individual incident could be explained away as forgetfulness or accident. I had my locks changed, installed a chain on the door, checked all the windows obsessively before leaving. The disturbances continued. A drawer in my bedroom would be open slightly. A coat in my wardrobe would be hanging differently than I'd left it. My toothbrush would be in a different position on the sink. What made it more disturbing was that nothing was ever stolen or damaged. Whoever was entering my flat wasn't taking anything or leaving obvious evidence of their presence. They were just moving through my space, touching my belongings, making their presence known in the smallest possible ways. It felt like psychological warfare, designed to make me question my own perception and feel unsafe in my own home. I installed a small camera in my living room. One of those basic security cameras that connects to your phone and records when it detects movement. The first few days showed nothing unusual. Just me moving around the flat going about my normal routine. Then on the fourth day, whilst I was at work, the camera captured someone entering my flat. The figure was dressed in dark clothes and wore a balaclava that completely obscured their face. They moved through my flat systematically, not looking for valuables to steal, but appearing to document everything. They opened drawers and cupboards, looked through papers on my desk, examined items on my shelves. They spent several minutes in my bedroom, going through my wardrobe and checking under my bed. The whole intrusion lasted about 40 minutes before they left as silently as they'd entered. Most disturbing was what they did at the end. They walked directly to where the camera was positioned, despite it being small and relatively well hidden. They stood there for several long seconds, staring directly into the lens, letting me know they were aware of being recorded and weren't concerned about it. Then they reached up and adjusted the camera angle slightly before leaving. A small violation that made it clear they could access my flat whenever they wanted, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I took the footage to the police immediately. They treated it more seriously this time, with actual evidence of someone illegally entering my home. But the figure in the video was completely unidentifiable, and they'd been careful not to touch anything that might leave fingerprints. The police arranged for forensics to check my flat, but they found nothing useful. Whoever was entering knew how to avoid leaving evidence. A detective assigned to my case asked if I'd recently signed up for any online services or provided personal information to anyone I didn't know well. I mentioned the competition email from months earlier, though I didn't see how that could be connected. She asked if I still had the email, and when I showed it to her, her expression changed. She explained that these fake competition emails were being used to gather detailed information about people's routines and living situations. The questions about work schedules, availability times, living alone, dietary preferences, none of it was about delivering a hamper. It was intelligence gathering, creating profiles of potential targets who could be monitored and accessed. The detective showed me how to access a dark web marketplace where these profiles were being sold. My information was listed there, complete with everything I'd provided on that verification form, and additional details that had apparently been gathered through surveillance. My work schedule, the fact that I lived alone, my regular shopping times, even my recent habit of visiting my mum on Sunday afternoons, all documented, analyzed, and made available for purchase. The listing described me as an ideal target for what they called residential access services. People could purchase rights to enter my flat during specific time windows when I was reliably away. The profile explained that locks had been bypassed using specialized tools, that the flat had minimal security, that entry and exit could be accomplished without alerting neighbors or authorities. But it wasn't just about burglary. The listing mentioned that the flat had been accessed multiple times already for photography and documentation purposes. There were buyers interested in detailed images of someone's private living space, in being able to study how a person organized their belongings, in having visual access to intimate details of a stranger's life. The marketplace showed my profile had been purchased multiple times by different users. Some had bought access for physical entry, which explained the person caught on my camera. Others had purchased photographic documentation, which meant images of my private space existed somewhere I'd never find them. The listing was still active, still accepting new purchases, still describing my flat as available for access. Comments beneath my listing discussed the quality of access and the accuracy of the timing information. Previous buyers had left feedback rating their experience, mentioning that my routine was reliable and that entry was straightforward. One comment noted that I'd installed a camera which had been easily managed during their visit. Another comment discussed specific items in my bedroom, describing my belongings in detail that suggested they'd spent considerable time examining my personal space. The police investigation eventually identified the person who'd created my profile, someone who'd sent thousands of fake competition emails and collected information from hundreds of respondents. They were prosecuted for fraud and other offenses, but the marketplace itself continued operating, and the profiles that had already been created remained accessible. My information was still there, marked as potentially compromised, but still available for reference. I moved out of that flat within weeks of discovering the marketplace. I couldn't stay somewhere that had been so thoroughly violated that multiple strangers had accessed and photographed while I was away. My new place has serious security, proper locks, multiple cameras, alarm system, the works. I'm hyper-vigilant about any requests for personal information, no matter how innocent they seem. But I know the profile still exists somewhere online. My old address, my routine from that period, images of my former living space that strangers can still view and study. The listing has been updated to note that I've moved, but the historical information remains accessible, permanently archived in spaces I can't reach or control. What haunts me most is thinking about all the other people who received similar competition emails and filled out verification forms, never realizing what they were actually providing. The detective told me thousands of these profiles had been created across the UK, targeting people who lived alone, who had predictable routines, who seemed vulnerable in ways that made their living spaces attractive to buyers on these dark web marketplaces. I still see marketing emails sometimes about competitions and prize draws, and I wonder how many are legitimate and how many are intelligence-gathering operations. Every request for personal information makes me suspicious now. Every form that asks about my schedule or living situation raises red flags that most people would never notice. The person caught on my camera was never identified. The police believe they were hired specifically to enter my flat and document it. Probably someone who'd purchased access through that marketplace and decided to verify the information they'd bought. They might have been planning something more serious, or they might have just been satisfied with the intrusion itself, the violation of entering someone's private space without their knowledge. I'll never know how many times my flat was accessed before I installed the camera. How many strangers walked through my rooms, examined my belongings, photographed my space while I was at work or visiting my mum. The camera only caught one person, but the marketplace comments suggested there had been multiple successful entries by different buyers over several months. That's what I think about now when I'm alone in my new flat, despite all the security measures I've installed. The knowledge that somewhere online, detailed information about my life is still available for purchase. That images of my former bedroom, my wardrobe, my personal belongings exist in private collections I'll never locate. That I enabled all of it by entering a competition I can't even remember, by filling out a verification form that seemed completely harmless. I won something once, or thought I had. What I actually won was a permanent place in a dark web marketplace, a profile describing my vulnerabilities and routines, and the knowledge that my privacy was systematically violated by people I'll never identify. All from answering a few questions about a hamper I was never going to receive. The competition was fake, but the consequences were real. That's what keeps me careful now, questioning everything, trusting nothing that seems too good to be true, because I learned the hard way that sometimes the cost of free entry is everything you thought was private documented, and sold to strangers who view your life as a commodity worth purchasing. The thing about the dark web is that it seems distant until it shows up at your front door. 6 months ago, I made one careless decision that's turned my entire life inside out. A single click that I can't take back. I haven't told my friends. How do you casually mention that you might be implicated in something horrific? It started on a Thursday night in February. One of those dreary winter evenings where darkness falls by 4 p.m. and seems to last forever. I was sprawled on my sofa, laptop balanced on my stomach, half watching some forgettable Netflix documentary while scrolling through Reddit. I live alone in a small flat in Manchester. Moved there for work 3 years ago, but never really built a social circle. I'm a graphic designer, which means I spend most of my days in front of screens, and most nights too. That particular night, I was bored. Not just regular bored, but that restless, existential kind of boredom where you feel like you're wasting your life away, one Netflix episode at a time. I'd been browsing the dark web on and off for about a year. Nothing serious, mostly out of curiosity, and a vague interest in cryptocurrency. I'm not technically inclined, but I'd managed to figure out how to use Tor and access the hidden parts of the internet that you don't stumble across through Google. That night, my boredom led me deeper than usual. I found myself on a marketplace that sold everything from counterfeit currency to hacked accounts. What caught my eye was a listing for something called a curiosity box. The description was vague. A curated collection of items you won't find elsewhere, each box unique, no returns, no questions. The price was steep, about £200 in Bitcoin, but something about it intrigued me. Maybe it was the mystery, or maybe it was just the promise of something different breaking the monotony of my existence. Whatever the reason, I made the payment, entered my delivery details, and promptly fell asleep on the sofa, the empty wine bottle on the floor probably explaining my lapse in judgment. The next morning, I woke with a hangover and a vague memory of my late-night purchase. I checked my Bitcoin wallet, and sure enough, the transaction had gone through. I felt a twinge of regret. £200 was a lot for what was probably just a box of worthless trinkets or illegal knockoffs. But what really unsettled me was that I'd used my real address. I'd been careful on previous dark web excursions, but the wine had made me careless. I told myself it would be fine. Worst case scenario, I'd wasted money on junk. Best case, I'd get something interesting to break the monotony. 2 days later, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing when I heard a knock at my door. It was a delivery driver with a small, unmarked brown package. I signed for it, surprised at how ordinary the whole transaction felt. The package was about the size of a shoebox, lightweight, with no return address or markings of any kind. Just my name and address printed on a generic label. I took it to my lounge and set it on the coffee table, suddenly feeling a strange reluctance to open it. For a moment, I considered just throwing it away unopened. But curiosity, the same curiosity that had gotten me into this situation, won out. I cut through the packaging tape with a kitchen knife and opened the box. Inside was a layer of bubble wrap, and beneath that, several items nestled in black tissue paper. The first item was a USB drive, matte black with no markings. The second was a small velvet drawstring bag. The third was a folded sheet of paper, and the fourth was a Polaroid photograph, face down. I examined the USB drive first, turning it over in my hands. Common sense told me not to plug an unknown drive from the dark web into my computer, but I figured my laptop was due for an upgrade anyway. I had decent security software, so I took the risk. The drive contained a single video file. I clicked on it, and my screen filled with footage of someone's home, filmed from what looked like a hidden camera. The footage showed an ordinary living room, sofa, TV, coffee table. Then someone walked into frame. It took me a moment to process what I was seeing. The person on screen was me. This was footage of my flat, filmed without my knowledge. The timestamp in the corner showed it was from 3 weeks ago. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding against my ribcage. Someone had been in my flat. Someone had hidden cameras in my home. I scanned the room frantically, looking for anything out of place, any tiny lens or device I might have missed. Then I remembered the other items in the box. With shaking hands, I opened the velvet bag. Inside was a key, an ordinary Yale key that looked disturbingly similar to my own front door key. I picked up the folded paper next. It contained a list of my daily routines, meticulously documented. When I left for work, which coffee shop I stopped at on Thursdays, my regular grocery shop on Fridays, even the fact that I called my mother every Sunday at 6 p.m. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just some random dark web scam. This was targeted surveillance. I'd been watched, studied, catalogued. But why? I'm nobody. A freelance graphic designer with an unremarkable life and a modest bank account. Why go to all this trouble? There was still the Polaroid. It lay face down in the box, and some irrational part of me thought that as long as I didn't look at it, this nightmare wouldn't be real. But I had to know. I picked it up and turned it over. The photo showed me, asleep on my sofa, clearly taken the very night I'd ordered the box. In the image, someone was standing over me, a figure in dark clothing, their face just out of frame. They were holding something that glinted in the low light, the blade of a knife hovering just inches from my throat. I dropped the photo as if it had burned me. They had been in my flat, while I was asleep, with a knife. I don't remember much of what happened next. I grabbed essential belongings and fled to a hotel. I called in sick to work. I spent hours searching my flat for cameras but found nothing. I changed the locks, installed a security system, even considered moving. But a horrible thought kept nagging at me. They'd been watching me for weeks before I ordered the box. This wasn't a consequence of my dark web purchase. The purchase itself had been part of their plan. For days, I jumped at every sound, checked over my shoulder constantly, slept with the lights on when I managed to sleep at all. I combed through my flat inch by inch, but found no cameras. Either they were incredibly well hidden, or they'd been removed. Neither possibility was comforting. A week after receiving the box, I came home to find a small package leaning against my door. No postage, no label, just a padded envelope. Inside was another USB drive. Despite every instinct screaming not to, I plugged it in. This time, the video showed a different flat, a different person sleeping. The same dark figure stood over them, knife in hand. But this time, the video didn't end with just the threat. I won't describe what happened next. I couldn't watch it all, but I saw enough to know it was real. At the end of the video, text appeared on screen. Your curiosity box has been delivered to another customer. That's when I understood. The curiosity box wasn't just a product. It was a system, a game, a chain. Someone had purchased access to my life, just as I had unknowingly purchased access to someone else's. And somewhere out there, another person was receiving a box containing footage of me, my routines, a key to my flat, and a photo of what could have happened while I slept. I went to the police, but what could I tell them? That I'd purchased something illegal on the dark web and was now being terrorized. That I potentially had evidence of a murder, but had acquired it through illegal means. I'd be implicated myself. It's been 6 months now. I've moved flats, changed my name, deleted all social media. I work exclusively from home and have groceries delivered. But I still feel watched, still check for cameras daily, still sleep with a baseball bat beside my bed. Because here's the thing about the dark web. It's not some separate reality that exists only in digital space. It's a gateway that allows the darkest parts of humanity to reach through your screen and into your physical world. When you engage with it, you're not just clicking links, you're opening doors. And sometimes, what comes through those doors follows you long after you've closed your browser. I don't know who received my information in their curiosity box. I don't know if they're watching me right now, waiting for the perfect moment to complete what was started that night as I slept on my sofa. I don't know if I'm a target, a random selection, or just another link in a chain of voyeuristic terror. All I know is that every night, as I double-check my locks and scan my new flat for unfamiliar shadows, I remember that single moment of boredom, that single careless decision, that single click that might eventually cost me everything. Because on the dark web, curiosity doesn't just kill cats. It creates ripples that turn into waves that drown you slowly, one sleepless night at a time. I think the most important lesson I've learned is that some threats don't announce themselves with dramatic music or warning signs. They slip quietly into your life through the devices you trust most. I learned this 3 months ago, and I haven't slept properly since. I work in digital marketing for a medium-sized agency in Bristol. Nothing particularly exciting, mostly managing social media campaigns and designing promotional materials for local businesses. I've always been glued to my phone, both for work and personal use. My girlfriend used to joke that I'd scroll through Instagram, even during the apocalypse. Ex-girlfriend now, actually. We broke up around a month before all this started. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those relationships that gradually fades out when you realize you're better as friends. After the breakup, I moved into a small flat on the outskirts of the city. One of those newer builds with paper-thin walls where you can hear your neighbors sneeze. I developed this habit of scrolling through my phone in bed before sleep. Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever would keep my mind occupied. I'd always leave my AirDrop on, mainly because I frequently shared files between my phone and laptop, and I was too lazy to keep turning it on and off. I never really thought about the security implications. Why would I? I lived in a decent area, and most AirDrop requests were just people sharing memes on public transport. It was a Tuesday night in early March when it happened. I remember because I'd had a particularly tedious day at work dealing with a client who couldn't decide what shade of blue they wanted for their logo. I'd gotten into bed around midnight, flat dark except for the blue glow of my phone screen, illuminating my face as I mindlessly scrolled through social media. Outside, a light rain tapped against my bedroom window, and somewhere in the distance, a car alarm kept going off intermittently. That's when the AirDrop notification appeared on my screen. Unknown device would like to share a photo. The preview thumbnail was too small to make out clearly, but it looked like some kind of map or location pin. Normally, I'd have declined any random AirDrop requests, but something about being half asleep and curious made me accept it. It's amazing how one thoughtless tap can change everything. The photo loaded, and I immediately felt more alert. It was a Google Maps screenshot with a red pin dropped on a specific location. Below the image were coordinates typed in plain text. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably someone trying to send their location to a friend and accidentally airdropping it to me instead. But something about it made me uncomfortable enough to actually check the coordinates. I copied the numbers and pasted them into Google Maps. The map centered and zoomed in on a location that made my blood run cold. It was my street. Not just my street, but specifically my block of flats. I sat up in bed suddenly wide awake. This had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe a neighbor was trying to send their address to someone and misclicked. I stared at my phone, half expecting another airdrop to come through with an apology or explanation. None came. I got out of bed and went to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peer out at the street below. The rain had picked up, blurring the streetlights into hazy orange globes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No suspicious figures standing under lampposts. No parked cars with people sitting inside them. Just the empty street, wet pavement reflecting the lights. I turned off AirDrop, put my phone on silent, and tried to sleep. I told myself it was nothing. A random coincidence, a technical glitch, or at worst, some neighbor playing a prank. But sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about those coordinates and how precisely they matched my location. The next morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd overreacted. In the harsh light of day, the incident seemed less sinister. I even turned AirDrop back on, though I set it to contacts only rather than everyone. I went to work, had another mundane day arguing about color schemes, and returned home feeling foolish about my midnight paranoia. That night, as I was once again in bed scrolling through my phone, another notification appeared. Not AirDrop this time, but an email. The subject line was simply the same coordinates from the night before. The sender's address was a random string of numbers and letters at a domain I didn't recognize. My thumb hovered over the notification for several seconds before I finally tapped it. The email contained no text, just an attachment, a photo. When I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. It was a picture of me from earlier that day, standing at my kitchen window, washing dishes. The photo had clearly been taken from somewhere outside my flat, looking in. I immediately closed the blinds and checked that my door was locked. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved from room to room, making sure all windows were secured. I considered calling the police but hesitated. What would I tell them? That someone sent me coordinates and a photo? They'd hardly consider that an emergency. Instead, I called a friend who works in IT security. I tried to sound calm as I explained what had happened, but there was an edge to my voice that I couldn't hide. He asked about my online presence, whether I'd made anyone angry recently, if I used the same passwords across multiple sites, standard security questions that did nothing to address the fact that someone was physically watching me. He suggested I reset all my passwords, enable two-factor authentication, and check for any unusual apps or permissions on my devices. I did all of that, and also went through my social media, removing location tags from photos and tightening privacy settings. For good measure, I disconnected my smart TV and even put tape over my laptop's webcam. Paranoid, perhaps, but at that point, I didn't care. I barely slept that night, keeping one eye on the door and the other on my phone, which I'd set to airplane mode. The next day at work, I was distracted and irritable. Every notification made me jump, and I kept feeling like someone was watching me. My boss noticed and suggested I take the rest of the week off. I didn't argue. When I got home, I found a small package leaning against my door. No postmark, no delivery information, just a padded envelope with my name handwritten on the front. I stood in the hallway staring at it for what felt like minutes, afraid to touch it. Eventually, I used a pen to drag it inside before closing and locking the door behind me. I should have called the police then. I should have left it unopened. But curiosity, that same fatal curiosity that had made me accept the airdrop, got the better of me. I carefully opened the envelope, half expecting it to contain something dangerous. Inside was a USB drive and a folded piece of paper. The paper contained more coordinates, different from the first set. When I checked them on my phone, they pointed to a location about 20 miles outside the city, in a rural area I wasn't familiar with. Against my better judgment, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained a single video file. I clicked play and immediately wished I hadn't. The video showed someone, me, from various angles throughout the previous week. Me leaving my flat in the morning. Me at a cafe near my office. Me shopping at the supermarket. Me through the windows of my flat at night. The footage was clearly taken over several days from different locations, sometimes zoomed in from a distance, sometimes from frighteningly close proximity. The final clip was the most disturbing. It showed me asleep in my bed, filmed from inside my bedroom. The camera moved closer until it was directly over me, looking down at my unconscious face. A gloved hand appeared in the frame, hovering just above my cheek, not quite touching. The video ended with text appearing on screen. The coordinates are a meeting place. Come alone tomorrow at midnight, or the next video goes to everyone in your contact list. I know things about you that would destroy your life. I ripped the USB drive out of my laptop and threw it across the room. Someone had been in my flat. Someone had stood over me while I slept. I grabbed my phone and keys and ran out the door, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove straight to a friend's house on the other side of the city. I told my friend I'd had a break-in, which wasn't entirely untrue. I spent that night on their sofa, jumping at every sound. In the morning, I went to the police station and reported everything. The airdrop, the email, the USB, the video. They took it seriously, especially the footage from inside my flat, but warned me that these cases were difficult to solve. Whoever was doing this was tech-savvy and careful. They advised me not to go to the coordinates and to stay with friends until they could investigate further. I didn't go to the meeting place, of course. I'm not that stupid. Instead, I stayed at my friend's place, changed all my contact information, and eventually moved to a different city altogether. The police never found who was responsible. They suggested it might be connected to the dark web, possibly someone who had accessed my personal information through data breaches and decided to target me for their own twisted entertainment. It's been 3 months now. I've moved twice more since then. I don't use social media anymore. I've changed my name. I keep AirDrop permanently disabled and check for cameras everywhere I go. I sleep with the lights on when I manage to sleep at all. No more videos have appeared, no more coordinates. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I could swear I hear the soft click of a camera shutter. And occasionally, my phone will light up with a notification from an unknown sender that disappears before I can open it. The police have a theory that I was targeted through a dark web service where people pay to have strangers stalked, a form of entertainment for those sick enough to enjoy watching someone's life unravel from fear. They call it real-life streaming or surveillance tourism. The idea that someone paid to watch me, to terrify me, to turn my life into their personal horror show, keeps me awake at night more than any bump in the dark ever could. Because the thing about the dark web is that it's not just some abstract digital space. It's a marketplace where your privacy, your security, your peace of mind can be bought and sold without your knowledge. And once you've been chosen, you never really know if they've stopped watching or just gotten better at hiding. Sometimes I wonder about those coordinates, about what would have happened if I'd gone to that meeting place, but I know I made the right choice. Some questions are better left unanswered, because on the dark web, your life is just content for someone else's entertainment, and the show only ends when they decide it does. She was middle-aged, wearing a navy tabard with crystal clear solutions embroidered across the chest, and she knew my name. When I told her there must be some mistake, she showed me the booking confirmation on her phone, my address, my full name, even my mobile number. Someone had arranged for my house to be deep cleaned while I was supposedly at work, and they'd paid in advance. I should have slammed the door right then. Instead, I let curiosity get the better of me. The booking had been made 3 days earlier through their website, she explained, with specific instructions about which rooms needed attention and a note that the homeowner would be present to supervise. The payment had come through their online system, all legitimate and above board. But I'd been working from home all week, recovering from a chest infection that had left me exhausted and housebound. I hadn't booked any cleaning services, and I certainly hadn't been planning to go anywhere. The woman, Janet, according to her ID badge, seemed genuinely confused by my denial. She kept checking her phone, scrolling through booking details and muttering about system errors. Eventually, she apologized for the confusion and said she'd sort it out with the office. As she walked back down my front path, I noticed she spent several minutes on her phone before driving away. That should have been the end of it, but the incident nagged at me throughout the day. Someone had my personal details, knew my address and daily routine well enough to book services during my supposed working hours. The sort of information that suggested more than casual knowledge of my life. I'd been living alone in the same rented flat in Reading for nearly 2 years, working as a freelance graphic designer, mostly for small local businesses. Nothing about my lifestyle should have attracted unwanted attention. I kept to myself, paid my bills on time, maintained friendly but distant relationships with my neighbors. The most exciting thing in my weekly routine was the Thursday quiz night at the pub down the road. Yet somehow, someone had been monitoring my movements closely enough to know exactly when I should have been away from home. That evening, I decided to check my computer for any signs of unauthorized access. Nothing sophisticated, just changing passwords and looking through browser history for anything I didn't recognize. What I found was more disturbing than any obvious security breach. My search history contained dozens of queries I'd never made. Searches for local cleaning services, home security systems, property rental agreements for my specific address, all dated over the past month, all conducted during hours when I was supposedly using the computer for work. The searches followed a logical progression, as if someone was researching my living situation in methodical detail. They'd looked up my landlord's details, checked property records, even browsed estate agent listings for comparable flats in the area. The sort of comprehensive background research that suggested serious intent rather than casual snooping. I ran every security scan I could think of, but found no evidence of malware or remote access tools. Yet the unauthorized searches continued appearing in my browser history over the following days, always conducted during times when I was actively using the computer for legitimate work. It was as if someone was sitting beside me, conducting parallel research, while I remained completely unaware of their presence. The second cleaning service appointment arrived the following Tuesday. This time it was a different company, Elite Home Care, but the same scenario played out. A polite woman at my door with a confirmed booking for services I'd never requested, payment already processed, specific instructions about my supposed absence during working hours. When I questioned her about the booking details, she mentioned that the original request had come through a specialized platform that catered to busy professionals who needed discreet, high-quality home services. The client had been very specific about timing and had paid a premium for guaranteed availability. After she left, I spent the afternoon researching these specialized platforms she'd mentioned. What I discovered led me into corners of the internet I'd never explored before. The legitimate cleaning service websites were straightforward enough, but they all mentioned partnership arrangements with exclusive client networks that operated through private channels. Following these references led me deeper into invitation-only platforms and private communities that existed beyond normal search engines. Eventually, I found myself accessing the dark web. The process was simpler than I'd expected, though I won't detail the specific steps involved. What mattered was what I found once I gained access to the hidden marketplaces and community boards that operated in that space. There was an entire economy built around domestic intrusion services, not the crude break-ins or obvious burglary operations you might expect, but sophisticated networks that specialized in subtle, long-term access to people's homes and private lives. They marketed themselves as providing ambient intelligence and lifestyle integration for clients who needed detailed information about specific individuals. The services offered were disturbingly comprehensive. Home access during predictable absence periods, computer monitoring that left no obvious traces, gradual collection of personal information and daily routine documentation, all presented as legitimate business services for clients with unspecified but apparently legal requirements. One platform in particular caught my attention. It was called Domestic Insight Solutions, and it offered what they described as comprehensive residential profiling for people in specific postcodes across the UK. Reading was prominently featured in their coverage area. The client testimonials were chilling in their casual tone, people praising the service for providing invaluable background research and seamless intelligence gathering that had enabled them to make informed decisions about their targets. The language was corporate and professional, but the implications were unmistakable. They were selling access to people's private lives. I spent hours browsing through service descriptions and pricing structures, trying to understand how the operation worked. Clients could commission detailed reports on specific individuals, including daily routines, work schedules, security vulnerabilities, and personal habits. The information was gathered through a combination of digital surveillance and physical access to homes during predetermined absence periods. The cleaning service appointments weren't genuine bookings. They were reconnaissance missions. Teams would arrive at target properties under the pretense of legitimate business, gather intelligence about security systems and daily routines, then report back to clients who had commissioned surveillance on specific individuals. But why had I been targeted? I wasn't involved in anything that should have attracted professional surveillance. No contentious business relationships, no legal disputes, no obvious reason why anyone would pay significant money to monitor my daily activities. The answer came when I discovered a client discussion board buried deeper in the marketplace structure. The conversation threads revealed that Domestic Insight Solutions didn't just respond to specific client requests. They also maintained a database of pre-researched subjects in various locations, conducting speculative surveillance on randomly selected individuals who fit certain demographic profiles. Young professionals living alone in rental properties were particularly popular targets. The logic was simple. People in this category were likely to have predictable routines, limited security awareness, and enough disposable income to make them interesting to potential clients. The surveillance data was collected proactively, then offered to clients who expressed interest in specific geographical areas or demographic groups. I was essentially a product in their catalogue, my daily routine and personal information packaged and sold to unknown buyers who might have any number of motivations for wanting detailed access to my private life. The realization made me physically sick, but I forced myself to continue reading through the client discussions. What I learned was worse than I'd imagined. Some clients were using this surveillance data for traditional criminal purposes, identifying optimal times for burglary, gathering information for identity theft, or planning more serious violent crimes. But others had motivations that were harder to categorize and somehow more disturbing. There were discussions about clients who enjoyed the psychological aspect of knowing intimate details about strangers' lives. People who derived satisfaction from watching their targets go about daily routines while remaining completely unaware they were being observed. The surveillance wasn't a means to an end. It was the end itself. Other threads discussed clients who used the gathered intelligence for what they called lifestyle integration, gradually inserting themselves into their targets' daily routines through carefully planned coincidental encounters, meeting them in coffee shops they were known to frequent, joining gyms or hobby groups where they were regular attendees, building relationships based on comprehensive prior knowledge of their interests and vulnerabilities. I thought about the cleaning service appointments, the unauthorized searches on my computer, the systematic collection of information about my living situation and daily routine. Someone had been building a detailed profile of my life, and now that information was available to anyone willing to pay for it. But the worst realization was still to come. While browsing through recent client requests, I found a posting that made my blood freeze. Someone had specifically commissioned enhanced surveillance on my address, with a note that they were particularly interested in direct engagement opportunities and would pay a premium for real-time access coordination. The posting was dated just 5 days earlier. Since then, there had been 3 follow-up messages from the same client, each one expressing increasing urgency about obtaining detailed scheduling information for my upcoming activities. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were planning something that required precise timing and detailed knowledge of my movements. I checked the timestamps on the messages and cross-referenced them with the cleaning service appointments. The correlation was perfect. Each appointment had been scheduled within hours of the client's request for updated information about my availability. The cleaning services weren't reconnaissance missions. They were trial runs, testing their ability to gain access to my property at specific times while monitoring my reactions to unexpected visits. They were preparing for something that required them to know exactly when I'd be home and exactly when I'd be vulnerable. I sat in my darkened flat that evening, trying to decide what to do with this information. The obvious choice was to contact the police. But what evidence did I actually have? Screenshots of dark web marketplaces that might not even be genuine, coincidental timing between cleaning appointments and online discussions that could be entirely unrelated. Even if the police took my concerns seriously, the platforms I discovered operated through layers of anonymity that would make investigation virtually impossible. The people running these services were clearly sophisticated enough to avoid easy detection, and their clients were paying premium prices specifically for that discretion. While I was debating my options, I heard footsteps on the stairwell outside my flat. This wasn't unusual. I lived in a converted Victorian house with 3 other flats, and residents came and went at all hours. But these footsteps stopped directly outside my door and remained there for several minutes without any sound of keys or knocking. I crept to the peephole and looked out into the hallway. A woman was standing motionless in front of my door, staring directly at the peephole as if she knew I was watching. She was holding what appeared to be a cleaning supplies caddy, though it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. We stared at each other through the peephole for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then she smiled, raised one hand in a small wave, and walked calmly back down the stairs. I spent the rest of the night sat against my front door with the chain locked and a kitchen knife in my hand, listening for any sound that might indicate someone attempting to gain entry. But the building remained quiet, and eventually I convinced myself that the encounter had been a coincidence or misunderstanding. The next morning, I found a business card that had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. It was for Crystal Clear Solutions, the same company whose representative had visited me the previous Tuesday. But instead of standard contact information, someone had handwritten a message on the back. "Thank you for your patience during our extended assessment period. We look forward to providing you with our full service very soon." I've been writing this account for the past 6 hours, and I'm not sure what I expect to accomplish by documenting everything I've discovered. The police wouldn't be able to act on anything I've learned, and alerting the surveillance network to my awareness of their activities would probably only accelerate whatever they're planning. What troubles me most is the realization that this probably isn't an isolated operation. If there are platforms sophisticated enough to conduct systematic surveillance on random individuals across multiple cities, then thousands of people might be living their daily lives completely unaware that their most private moments are being catalogued and sold. The cleaning service appointments were just the beginning. The real service they're preparing to provide is something that requires detailed knowledge of my routine, precise timing, and the ability to gain access to my property when I'm most vulnerable. I don't know when they'll make their move, but I know it will be soon. The client who commissioned enhanced surveillance on my address has been posting increasingly urgent requests for real-time information. They're not content to simply observe anymore. They want to meet me properly. It's Tuesday morning now, and I can hear someone climbing the stairs to my flat. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stop at each landing, as if checking door numbers. I know who it is before they reach my floor, and I know this isn't a reconnaissance visit. This is the full service they've been preparing to deliver. The footsteps have stopped outside my door, and someone is testing the handle very gently to see if it's locked. I can hear the soft rattle of what sounds like professional lock-picking tools, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I should call for help, but my phone has been making strange clicking noises when I try to use it, and I suspect my communications are being monitored. Even if I could reach the police, they wouldn't arrive in time to prevent whatever is about to happen. The lock has just clicked open, and I can hear my front door swinging slowly inward. Whoever is entering is taking their time, moving with the careful precision of someone who knows the property layout intimately and wants to avoid any unnecessary noise. They've been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering intelligence and testing their access methods until they were completely confident of success. Now they're here to provide the full service their client has commissioned, and I finally understand what that means. The footsteps are moving through my hallway now, approaching the room where I'm writing this. I can hear the soft rustle of what sounds like plastic sheeting being unfolded, and the quiet clink of metal tools being arranged. Professional sounds that suggest they've done this before. The most dangerous button I've ever clicked wasn't labeled something like launch missile or even delete account. It was innocuously titled Recommended Darknet Experience. It turns out when a VPN service offers to show you what you're protecting yourself from, sometimes they're actually showing you who's coming for you next. 3 months have passed since I clicked that button, and I haven't slept through the night since. I work as a data analyst for a healthcare company in Birmingham. Nothing particularly exciting, just crunching numbers and generating reports about hospital efficiency and patient outcomes. I'm not technically a cybersecurity expert, but I know enough about computers to be the person my parents and friends call when their Wi-Fi stops working. My interest in online privacy started about a year ago after our company experienced a data breach. Nothing catastrophic, just some leaked email addresses and phone numbers. But it was enough to make me realize how vulnerable our digital lives really are. So I started researching ways to better protect myself online. I installed ad blockers, switched to more secure browsers, stopped using Google for searches, that sort of thing. I became increasingly uncomfortable with how much information I was giving away just through normal browsing. I'd read articles about VPNs, virtual private networks, and how they could help maintain anonymity online, so I decided to try one out. After comparing different services, I settled on one called Secure Shield VPN. It had good reviews, a reasonable price point, and offered a 30-day free trial with all premium features included. I downloaded the app, created an account with a new email address I'd set up specifically for privacy tools, and started exploring the features. The app was sleek and user-friendly, with the usual array of server locations to choose from and different protocols for connection. What caught my attention, though, was a section called Premium Experiences that was only available to trial users and paying subscribers. The description explained these were curated online experiences that showcased the importance of privacy and security tools. One in particular stood out. Recommended Darknet Experience. See what you're protecting yourself from. I was intrigued. I'd heard of the dark web, of course, but had never actually accessed it. I knew it required special browsers like Tor and wasn't something you could just Google your way into. The idea that this VPN would offer some kind of guided tour seemed educational, if a bit gimmicky. I figured it was probably just some pre-selected sites that showed off illegal marketplaces from a safe distance, the digital equivalent of a safari. It was a Friday evening when I decided to check it out. My girlfriend was away visiting her parents for the weekend, so I had the flat to myself. I remember it was raining heavily, drops drumming against the windows as I sat at my desk with a glass of whiskey beside my laptop. I clicked on the recommended Darknet Experience option in the app, which prompted a notification. This will configure your system for secure Tor access and guide you through selected Darknet locations. Continue. I clicked yes, expecting some kind of tutorial to appear. Instead, the app seemed to make some changes to my system settings, and then a custom browser window opened automatically. It looked similar to Tor, but had the Secure Shield logo in the corner. A welcome message explained that I was now browsing through a secure, anonymous connection and could explore the curated site safely. The interface showed a sidebar with different categories: marketplaces, forums, services, information, and one simply labeled Other. Each had several sub-entries with innocuous names like Alpha Market or Liberty Forum. It felt surprisingly legitimate, like browsing an app store rather than the infamous dark web. I started with the marketplaces section, curious about what was actually for sale in these notorious black markets. The first site looked like a bare-bones version of Amazon or eBay, with listings for drugs, counterfeit goods, and hacked account credentials. Nothing I hadn't expected to see. The next few sites were similar, though some specialized in specific categories like prescription medications or fake IDs. After about an hour of casual browsing, I switched to the forums section. These were more interesting. Discussions about privacy, politics, technology, and yes, illegal activities. I was careful not to create any accounts or interact, just observing from a distance. Then I noticed something odd. In the other category, there was a listing called Premium Access, with a small crown icon beside it. The description simply read, "Exclusive content for valued members." I assumed this was just some additional marketing for the VPN service, perhaps showcasing the kind of content you might accidentally stumble upon without proper protection. When I clicked on it, a loading screen appeared with text explaining that this area was being specially configured for my session. This struck me as strange. Why would one particular section need special configuration? But before I could reconsider, the page loaded. It opened to what looked like a streaming site, similar to YouTube but with a minimalist black interface. There were about a dozen video thumbnails arranged in a grid. Each had a vague title like Session 23 or Interview 7 and what appeared to be a date from the previous month. No descriptions, no view counts, no comments. I clicked on one titled Orientation 4, assuming it might be some kind of instructional video about the dark web or privacy tools. The video buffered for a moment, then began to play. It showed a room that looked like a basement or storage area. Concrete walls, no windows, harsh fluorescent lighting. In the center was a person sitting in a chair, facing the camera. They were wearing ordinary clothes, but had a black hood covering their head. Behind them stood another figure in dark clothing, face obscured by shadows. My first thought was that this was some kind of mock interrogation scenario, perhaps a dramatization meant to illustrate the dangers of compromised privacy. But as the video continued, I realized with growing horror that this wasn't staged. The hooded person's hands were bound behind them, and they were visibly trembling. The standing figure began asking questions in a distorted voice. Questions about usernames, passwords, and access codes. I quickly closed the video, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be real, could it? It had to be some kind of extreme roleplay or scare tactic designed to emphasize the importance of security. Yet something about the victim's posture, the genuine fear evident even through the hood, felt sickeningly authentic. Against my better judgment, I clicked on another video, this one titled Session 17. Similar setup, different victim. This time, the interrogation was more aggressive. I shut it down after less than a minute, feeling physically ill. I was about to close the entire browser when a chat notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Enjoying the premium access content. Your feedback is valuable to us. I froze, staring at the message. I hadn't logged into any chat system. I hadn't provided any way for them to contact me within this browser. Yet here was a direct message, clearly indicating that someone was aware of my presence, my actions, my viewing choices. I didn't respond, hoping they would assume I was away from my computer. Another message appeared. We notice you've accessed 2 of our exclusive videos. Your interest has been noted. Panic rising, I closed the browser completely and shut down my laptop. I unplugged my router for good measure, as if physically disconnecting from the internet could somehow erase what had just happened. I spent the rest of the evening in a state of growing paranoia, checking my locks, closing my curtains, jumping at every noise from the street below. By morning, I had almost almost convinced myself that I'd overreacted. The videos were probably just elaborate fakes, designed to shock users into taking privacy seriously. The messages were likely automated, triggered by my viewing activity. Nothing to worry about. I cautiously turned my laptop back on, but didn't reconnect to the internet immediately. Instead, I checked for any unusual files or programs that might have been installed. Everything seemed normal. When I finally reconnected and checked my email, there was nothing suspicious there either. I uninstalled the Secure Shield VPN app and decided to put the whole experience behind me. 3 days later, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was simply my home address, nothing else. The body of the email contained a link. Despite every instinct screaming not to click it, my curiosity and fear got the better of me. I opened it in an incognito browser window. It was a Google Street View image of my flat building. But this wasn't from the public Street View database. This was a recent photo taken from across the street, showing my specific window. My curtains were open, and if I looked closely, I could just make out my silhouette sitting at my desk. Below the image was text that made my blood run cold. Premium members receive home visits. Your trial begins tomorrow. I left my flat that night, staying with a friend under the pretense that I had a plumbing issue. I reported the email to the police as a potential threat, but without more concrete evidence, they couldn't do much besides take a statement. I didn't tell them about the dark web videos. How could I explain that without implicating myself in potentially viewing something illegal? Over the next week, I received 3 more emails from different addresses. Each contained photos taken at increasingly close range. One from the street directly in front of my building, one from the entrance hallway, and finally, one that could only have been taken from inside my flat while I was away, showing my desk with my laptop closed on it. The final email had no text, just an attachment, a video file. It showed hooded figures entering an apartment that looked similar to mine, finding the occupant asleep, and I couldn't watch more than a few seconds. The file name was preview session24.mp4. I never returned to my flat. I quit my job, moved to a different city, changed my phone number, and created all new email addresses. I withdrew most of my savings in cash and found a place to rent that didn't require background checks or digital payments. I bought a new laptop and make sure it's never connected to any accounts that could be traced to my previous identity. It's been 3 months now. Sometimes I go days without thinking about it, almost convincing myself that I overreacted to an elaborate scare tactic. Then I'll notice someone looking at me too long on the street, or I'll receive an email to an account that no one should know about, containing nothing but a crown emoji. Last week, I woke up to find my new laptop open, when I know I closed it before going to bed. The browser was open to a blank page, with just a countdown timer showing 7 days. I don't know who these people are. I don't know if they're government operatives running some kind of twisted surveillance program, criminals documenting their activities, or something else entirely. I don't know why they chose me or what happens when the countdown reaches 0. All I know is that the tools we use to protect ourselves online can sometimes connect us to things we were never meant to see. And once you've been granted premium access, there's no way to cancel your subscription. The worst decisions in life often start with the phrase, "How bad could it be?" 6 months ago, I found out exactly how bad it could be when I decided to pick up a package from a dark web marketplace. I still check my locks 3 times before bed, still flinch at unexpected knocks on the door, still scan crowds for faces I hope never to see. Writing this down feels dangerous, but keeping it bottled up is slowly driving me insane. I'm just an ordinary bloke from Manchester, work in graphic design, live in a small flat with my cat. Nothing special about me. I've always been fascinated by technology though. Built my first computer at 12, taught myself coding at 15, that sort of thing. This fascination eventually led me to the dark web about 3 years ago. At first, it was just curiosity, wanting to see if it was really as mysterious as people made it out to be. For the first couple of years, I just browsed anonymously, looking at marketplaces selling counterfeit goods, banned books, that kind of thing. Never bought anything, never interacted with anyone. Just a digital tourist, watching from a safe distance. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, isn't it? It pulls you in deeper and deeper until you're in over your head. It started after a bad breakup last year. I was feeling pretty low, spending most nights alone with a bottle of whiskey, browsing parts of the internet I probably shouldn't have been. There was this forum I frequented where people discussed hard-to-find items, vintage electronics, discontinued products, rare collectibles, the kind of stuff you can't just get on Amazon. One night, I saw a post about a retro gaming console that had never been officially released, a prototype that supposedly had games on it that were never made public. As a massive gaming nerd, this immediately caught my interest. The poster claimed to have acquired it from a former game developer and was willing to sell it for cryptocurrency. The price was steep, but not outrageous. About £800 in Bitcoin. After a week of back and forth messages and too many late nights staring at my screen, I decided to go for it. I'd never made a purchase on the dark web before, but I convinced myself this wasn't like buying drugs or weapons. It was just a rare gaming item. The seller had good reviews from other forum members, and they agreed to a dead drop exchange rather than posting it, which felt safer somehow. For those who don't know, a dead drop is when the seller leaves the item in a predetermined location, and you pick it up after they've gone. No face-to-face meeting, no names exchanged, completely anonymous. The seller gave me coordinates to a location on the outskirts of Manchester, an abandoned industrial estate that had been scheduled for demolition for years but was still standing. I know how this sounds, red flags everywhere, but I convinced myself this was just how these transactions worked. The place would be deserted. I'd grab the package and be back home playing unreleased games from the 90s within an hour. The pickup was scheduled for 10 p.m. on a Friday in November. It was already dark by 4:30, and a light drizzle had been falling all day, making the streets gleam under the streetlights. I drove to a car park about half a mile from the location, figuring it would be safer to approach on foot. The rational part of my brain was finally raising some objections, suggesting that maybe meeting a stranger from the dark web at an abandoned factory wasn't the best idea I'd ever had. The industrial estate was exactly as depressing as you'd expect. Crumbling brick buildings with broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and rusting chain-link fences with no trespassing signs hanging at odd angles. The only light came from a single street lamp at the entrance and the occasional passing headlights from the distant main road. Following the GPS on my phone, I made my way to the specific building the seller had described. It was an old warehouse with most of its roof missing, the inside a cavernous space filled with shadows. The dead drop location was supposedly just inside the main entrance. Behind the third column on the left, inside a blue plastic container. I switched on my phone's torch and stepped inside, the beam creating more shadows than it dispelled. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, empty cans, chunks of fallen ceiling. Every step echoed in the empty space, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond my light's reach. I found the third column, and sure enough, there was a blue plastic storage box behind it. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a shoebox. I picked it up, surprised by how light it felt. This wasn't a gaming console, unless it was just components. That's when I noticed something odd. The box was warm, not hot, but definitely above ambient temperature, as if it had been sitting in a heated room rather than a freezing abandoned warehouse. I should have left right then, should have put the box down and walked away. But instead, I opened it. Inside was a single smartphone, not a gaming console, not even close to what I'd been promised. It was an older model, nothing special. The screen was dark, but as soon as I touched it, it lit up. No lock screen, just a video player already open, showing a paused video. The thumbnail was dark and unclear. Standing there in that cold, empty building, I pressed play. The video showed a room I didn't recognize, some kind of basement or cellar with concrete walls. In the center was a person tied to a chair, head covered with a black bag. Someone moved into frame, wearing gloves and a mask that covered their entire face. They held up a piece of paper with today's date written on it, then a second paper with my username from the forum. My blood turned to ice. I nearly dropped the phone as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't a scam in the traditional sense. I wasn't being sold a fake item. This was something much worse. The video continued, showing the masked person removing the bag from the captive's head. I won't describe what happened next. I couldn't watch it all. I shut the video off after less than a minute, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside the warehouse. Multiple sets, getting closer. In a moment of panic-induced clarity, I switched off my torch, dropped the phone back in the box, and moved as quickly and quietly as possible toward the back of the warehouse. There was a door there. I'd noticed it on my way in. I had no idea where it led, but it had to be better than staying. I made it through the door, just as beams of torchlight swept into the warehouse from the main entrance. The back door led to a narrow alley between buildings. I ran, not caring about the noise now, just needing to put as much distance between myself and whoever had followed me there. I made it back to my car without seeing anyone, drove home with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and spent the night with my furniture pushed against the door, convinced that whoever had set this up would be coming for me next. The next day, after no sleep and too much coffee, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Best case scenario, the video was fake, some sick prank to scare dark web tourists like me. Worst case, I couldn't even bring myself to consider the worst case, that I had somehow, unwittingly, paid for someone to be hurt, that my Bitcoin transaction had funded something unspeakable. I spent the next week in a state of paranoia, jumping at every sound, convinced I was being followed. I changed all my passwords, wiped my computer, threw away the hard drive. I even considered going to the police, but what would I say? That I'd tried to buy illegal merchandise on the dark web and may have accidentally funded a violent crime. That I'd handled a phone that potentially contained evidence of such a crime and then left it behind. After a month of constant anxiety, I moved to a different city. I told everyone it was for a new job, but really, I just couldn't stand being in Manchester anymore. Couldn't walk past that industrial estate on my way to work. Couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It's been 6 months now. I haven't been back on the dark web, haven't even used Tor. I checked the local Manchester news obsessively for reports of bodies found in abandoned buildings, but nothing has ever come up that matches what I saw. Sometimes I managed to convince myself it was all an elaborate hoax, that the video was staged, the follow-up footsteps just a coincidence. But then I remember how real it looked, how the person's eyes widened in genuine fear when the bag was removed, how the phone was warm, as if it had recently been in someone's pocket, how specific the message was, with my username clearly displayed. I don't know if I was set up from the beginning or if I just got caught in something bigger and more terrible than I could have imagined. All I know is that the dark web isn't just some harmless playground for the technologically curious. It's a place where real people do real harm, and sometimes your curiosity can make you complicit in ways you never intended. I still have nightmares about that video, still wonder who the person in the chair was, and if there was anything I could have done to help them. Still wonder if somewhere out there, someone has my name on a list because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. So that's my story. A warning, I suppose, about the dangers of thinking you can dip your toes into the darker parts of the internet without consequences. Some things can't be unseen, and some curiosities come with costs far higher than you're willing to pay. The thing about accidentally becoming an accomplice to murder is that nobody ever tells you how normal it feels while it's happening. You feed the cats, water the plants, take photos of everything like you're supposed to, and it's only later, when you're staring at a missing person poster with a face you recognize, that you realize you've been cleaning up crime scenes and calling it pet sitting. I'd been looking for extra income after my hours got cut at the garden centre in Shrewsbury. The pay there had never been brilliant, but when they reduced everyone to part-time during the quiet winter months, I was struggling to cover my rent on the bedsit I shared with my girlfriend. We'd been talking about getting a place together properly, but that required deposits and guarantees that were impossible on reduced wages. The pet sitting opportunity came through one of those local Facebook groups where people advertise everything from spare furniture to odd jobs. Someone had posted asking for reliable pet sitters to help with various animals around Shropshire and the surrounding areas. The pay was decent, about twice what I was earning per hour at the garden centre, and the work seemed straightforward enough. The post mentioned that they worked with pet owners who travelled frequently for business and needed someone trustworthy to care for their animals during extended absences. Most assignments involved staying overnight in the owners' homes to ensure the pets maintained their normal routines and felt secure in familiar environments. I responded to the advertisement and received a prompt reply asking about my experience with different types of animals and my availability for irregular scheduling. The person who contacted me explained that many of their clients had demanding careers that required sudden travel, so pet sitters needed to be flexible about accepting assignments at short notice. We arranged to meet at a cafe in Shrewsbury to discuss the specifics of the work. The woman who met me introduced herself as Sarah and seemed professional and knowledgeable about animal care. She explained that her agency specialized in providing high-quality pet care services for clients who were willing to pay premium rates for reliable and discreet service. Sarah emphasized that discretion was particularly important because many clients were concerned about security and privacy. Wealthy pet owners often worried about burglary or other crimes targeting their homes while they were away. So pet sitters needed to be extremely careful about maintaining confidentiality regarding the properties they worked in. The first assignment Sarah gave me was straightforward enough. A couple in a village outside Telford needed someone to look after their 2 dogs while they attended a business conference in London. The house was a comfortable detached property with a large garden, and the dogs were friendly and well trained. The homeowners provided detailed instructions for caring for the animals, including feeding schedules, exercise routines, and emergency contact information. They seemed like typical middle-class professionals who simply wanted to ensure their pets were properly cared for during their absence. However, I noticed some unusual aspects of the house that seemed excessive for ordinary residential security. There were cameras and monitoring equipment throughout the property, including areas where pet care activities wouldn't normally require surveillance. The technology seemed more sophisticated than what most homeowners would install for basic security purposes. When I asked about the extensive surveillance system, the homeowners explained that they had invested in comprehensive security due to previous break-in attempts in the area. The cameras allowed them to monitor their property remotely while traveling and provided peace of mind about both security and pet welfare. This seemed like a reasonable explanation for people with valuable property and beloved pets. Many homeowners were becoming increasingly security conscious, particularly in rural areas where police response times could be lengthy. The pet sitting work continued for several weeks with similar assignments at different properties around the region. All involved caring for animals in well-appointed homes while the owners traveled for business. The pets were generally well-behaved, and the homeowners provided comprehensive instructions for their care. But I began noticing patterns across different properties that seemed unusual for coincidental similarities. Many homes contained identical security equipment, similar monitoring systems, and comparable arrangements for managing pet care during owner absences. More concerning were the specific instructions I received about documenting pet care activities. Sarah began requesting detailed photographic records of the animals, their behavior, and their interactions with the home environment. She explained that many clients wanted comprehensive documentation to ensure their pets were receiving proper care. The photography requirements became increasingly specific and extensive. I was asked to document not just the animals themselves, but details about the homes, their contents, and any activities visible from the properties. The level of documentation seemed to go far beyond what would be necessary for monitoring pet welfare. Some of the properties I worked in showed signs that they weren't actually occupied by the people who had supposedly hired me for pet sitting services. Personal belongings, mail, and other indicators suggested that the homes belonged to different people than those who had arranged the pet care assignments. When I raised questions about these discrepancies, Sarah explained that many clients used property management services or had complex ownership arrangements that meant the people arranging pet care weren't necessarily the registered homeowners. Wealthy individuals often had intricate arrangements for managing their various properties and responsibilities. Around the 6th week of pet sitting work, I discovered that one of the properties where I had been caring for animals was listed as being occupied by an elderly woman who had been reported missing several weeks earlier. The missing person reports described someone who lived alone with several cats in the exact house where I had been providing pet care services. The realization that I might be working in the home of someone who had disappeared was deeply disturbing. The pet sitting arrangements appeared to be providing cover for people to access and monitor properties belonging to vulnerable individuals who were no longer able to protect their homes. When I tried to discuss this discovery with Sarah, she reminded me of the confidentiality agreements I had signed when beginning pet sitting work. She emphasized that client privacy was essential and that making assumptions about ownership arrangements could create serious legal problems for everyone involved. She also began demonstrating knowledge of my personal circumstances that she could not have gathered through our professional relationship. References to my financial situation, living arrangements, and daily activities suggested that I had been under surveillance while conducting pet sitting assignments. The monitoring became more obvious over the following days with clear signs that my movements and communications were being tracked. The same surveillance techniques that were being used to monitor the properties where I worked were apparently being applied to monitor the pet sitters as well. I realized that the pet sitting work had been used to recruit me into systematic burglary and property theft operations disguised as animal care services. The homes where I had been working belonged to vulnerable people who had been removed from their properties through various means, allowing criminals to access and loot their belongings under the cover of providing pet care. The extensive documentation I had been providing was probably being used to catalog valuable items and assess properties for systematic theft. The pets I had been caring for were likely abandoned animals left behind when their owners disappeared or were forced from their homes. The missing person case I had discovered was probably typical of how the operation worked. Vulnerable individuals were targeted and removed from their homes, allowing criminals to access their properties for extended periods while maintaining the appearance of providing legitimate pet care services. When I attempted to report my suspicions to the police, I discovered that proving criminal activity based on pet sitting arrangements was extremely difficult. The work had been presented as legitimate animal care. The surveillance could be justified as security measures, and the property access could be explained as authorized pet sitting services. Sarah's organization continued to contact me for several months after I stopped working for them, offering additional pet sitting opportunities and occasionally sending references to my personal activities to remind me that their surveillance capabilities remained active. I never determined the full scope of their operations or what happened to the people whose homes I had been systematically documenting under the pretense of pet care. The combination of property access, comprehensive surveillance, and systematic documentation suggested an organization capable of extensive burglary and theft targeting vulnerable homeowners. What I understand now is that they had developed effective methods for recruiting unwitting accomplices to property crimes by presenting theft and surveillance as legitimate animal care work. They understood how to exploit people's love of animals and need for income to recruit participants in systematic victimization of vulnerable property owners. The most disturbing aspect of this experience was how my genuine care for animals had been transformed into participation in crimes targeting people who were probably as vulnerable as the pets I thought I was helping. The pet sitting work had been a recruitment method designed to identify people who could be trusted with property access and manipulated into maintaining silence about criminal activities. I still receive occasional contact attempts from similar pet care agencies offering well-paid animal sitting opportunities that involve working in the homes of traveling professionals. The positions they advertise always emphasize discretion and security awareness, always involve extensive documentation requirements, and always include responsibilities that go beyond typical pet care duties. I decline these opportunities immediately now, but I wonder how many other animal lovers have found themselves in similar situations, believing they are providing legitimate pet care while actually participating in systematic property crimes targeting the most vulnerable members of their communities.